Quick content and spoiler warning for Fear and Hunger. We do talk about some endgame plot points and bosses. Also, we'll be talking about a few icky and nasty things that we can find in the game. But of course, you clicked on this so you know what you're getting into. I hope.
A marriage. In the world of Fear and Hunger, a marriage occurs when two willing participants use the show love option on a ritual circle to honor the god of creation, Sylvian. Through the ritual, the two participants will be joined in the flesh and become one, creating a new entity, a mix of the two, called a marriage. A marriage appears as a deformed humanoid that seems to have parts of the two combined. The in-game sprite clearly shows a difference in the left and right of the marriage. We can see that one of the arms is a lot longer and thicker. And there are even darker variants on this that we encountered in the Gauntlet with the Moonless Guards, which are a marriage between a prison guard and a moonless cave dog. And I think that's all I really need to know about that. There is even a nastier variant on the marriage called an Abominable Marriage. If someone that has already performed a marriage tries to perform one again, merging with a third person or creature, it would lead to this abominable marriage, which is a merger of three different entities in a frame that cannot hold it, and being an affront to nature and the human form. While some may want to pursue this option to get greater physical strength and improve their chances in survival in the dungeon, you have to ask the question, is it worth it to give up your human form to become this deformed parody of the human form? The Devour ability. The Devour ability is an ability that, I'm going to mispronounce this, Rag, I'll just leave it at that, can inherit from his warrior culture in Odengard, giving him an advantage in the dungeon. The Devour ability allows you to consume the body of your fallen enemies after defeating them in battle. In the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, where food is scarce, having an extra food source is an extremely useful ability. The only real downside is that you have to be careful with what you eat. More natural types of enemies, like the prison guards, are safe to eat, but some of the later enemies, like the Mumbler, Lord of Flies, White Angel, could be poisonous or toxic. There is no greater way to demonstrate victory over an enemy
than to eat your enemies.
But considering all the other things that would be seen in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, devouring your enemies, I guess, really isn't that bad, all things considered. The Wolf Mask Orgy. Down in the mines, the protagonist of our story, going deeper into the dungeon, might hear moaning and groaning coming down from a deeper section of the mine. Descending, you can see the Wolf Mask ritual, which will probably have to be censored due to YouTube's monetization policies. Encountering the Wolf Mask, we can see and discuss what is this ritual to honor Grogoroth, as the participants eat each other and themselves while still awake and alive. Mesmerized in a trance-like state, it's hard to tell if the participants are doing this willingly or under some sort of spell or mind control state. The player will have an option to join the Wolf Mask ritual once, without risk of being lost in the trance. Doing this will fill up the hunger meters for all members of the party, but doing it more than one time will require a coin flip in order for the player character to be able to break out of the trance and leave. Otherwise, the implication is that the player character would be stuck in the orgy until he perishes from the injuries sustained. Fear and Hunger very cleverly uses what I call an after-death scene. After fighting some characters, if the player loses, you will be treated to an additional scene that doesn't really impact gameplay, but just acts as flavor text, just to give some more flavor to the enemies and the world of Fear and Hunger. Usually these are pretty brutal and disturbing scenes. If early in the game, on the first floors of the dungeon, if the player falls in combat to the deformed torturer of the dungeon on the second floor, we will be treated to a particularly sadistic after-death scene. We will see the player character bound as a torturer, goes around and one by one dismembers the player character, taking a particularly evil and nasty delight in doing so. On the topic of disturbing after-death scenes, if the player dies to an elite guard, there is a chance of triggering a scene where the player character will wake up in a locked room with the elite guard with both their legs dismembered. You can try to get away, but once you get to either of the two doors, you find out that they're locked. So the implication here is that the elite guard wanted to play with you and chase you around before bashing your head in.
Alright, next on our list is the guard's phalluses, or the stingers, peepees. The exposed phalluses in the game are used to make the player feel uncomfortable. It's not the type of imagery you would usually see in most run-of-the-mill RPGs or video games. So their presence might make some players feel off balance or off put, making you wonder what else is there to come. Is there anything else unexpected that the game will throw at you? Their design is comically large and long, almost to the point of making it funny. I mean, looking at the character design for the guards, you would think that the stingers would get in the way of running or being a trip hazard. I mean, how do the guards run? Does it just slap against their knees the entire time? Also, another detail that always got to me is how the elite guard is armored and his armor has a section for his phallus. I'm not going to try to show you that in this video, but I am sure you are capable in your Google skills to find a picture on the internet. I've just never seen armor used that way. Pocket Cat. At first glance, there's nothing particularly off-putting about this character. When you first see him in the caverns, he comes off as a well-dressed man with a kind of weird mask, but nothing particularly disturbing past that. What is off-putting is 1, his demeanor, and 2, his intentions. When it comes to his demeanor, the way that he talks is completely unique in the game and different and seemingly divorced from the setting that you're in. He talks in a Victorian and almost cheerful manner, as if completely oblivious to all the horrors of the dungeon around you. The uniqueness of his vocabulary just makes him seem more otherworldly. But where he really gets disturbing is in his intentions. His goal is to collect children, and he's happy to trade from his stockpile of books and claymores for any children. That by itself is disturbing and unnerving. But what takes it a step further is that if you actually complete the trade with him, he starts doing this hand movement in his pocket, which, well, you can see it on screen. I don't really need to elaborate more on that. It just gets under my skin on a very primordial level. Moving on. The Human Hydra. A very popular early game monster you encounter. A further perversion of the marriage ritual that we had talked about earlier in the video. But rather than involving 2 or 3 people, the Human Hydra is a marriage of a large group of people. Presumably, having been driven insane or to desperation by the corruption of the Cube of the Depths, the Hydra is believed to be composed by a large number of the dungeon's former guards. What makes it worse is that it only desires one thing, a human child. And if you feed it one, it will comment on how tasty it is. Yum? The Harvest Man. The Harvest Man. A great example of body horror in video games. His design is uncomfortable. He has distorted dimensions and extra limb, and a head that looks comparatively normal to the rest of his body with a very creepy smile. Why is he smiling? Sometimes in combat, he won't even attack on his turn, but rather, he will just pet somebody very gently on their head. Kind of like he sees you as a pet, a collectible, something cute, or he's amused by you. But as if that wasn't bad enough, there's the question of what is it that the Harvest Man harvests? He's not called that for no reason. There's something that he must be roaming Wahab collecting or harvesting. And we get a glimpse of that from the after death scene if the player falls to a harvest man. Here we can see the harvest man putting his many hands to good use. I'm not going to describe anything else because you can see it on screen, and yeah, you don't need me to say anything. Self-dismemberment. Now, this is something that's gonna instinctually unnerve anybody. Fear and hunger likes to push you into desperate situations and force you to think your way out. More than once, I've ended up taking a hit that gets one of my party members an infected limb, or stepped on one of those fucking rusty nails. Since the game drops are RNG dependent, you might get very few herb drops. There are a few guaranteed green herbs that spawn on the very early levels, and then again in the modern version of Mahabre at the end game. So that means with some bad luck, you might end up in a situation where you might be getting infected limbs, but without enough green herbs to cure the infections, leaving you with one last remedy: amputation. A decision not taken lightly, but there are times when it does become the most viable option, especially if the limb in question is a leg from one of your party members. Since losing a leg from a character that's not your main character won't affect your overworld travel speed, sometimes the best thing you can do is whip out the old bone saw to take care of an infection. The other case is when someone that is only using a single-handed weapon gets an infected arm. You might reach the conclusion that it's better to amputate rather than reload the game, or lose the character to the infection, but doing so will prevent your character from being able to hold dual-handed weapons or shields. But some characters can't do that anyway. In my playthrough, where I beat the god of fear and hunger for the first time, I had to use the bone saw on the little girl to keep her alive. Since she doesn't really attack too much and can't hold a shield or dual-handed weapon, there wasn't an immediate loss for my party. Besides, she wouldn't need the arm once we got to the bottom of the dungeon. Rotten meat and the maggot running up your arm. Something I thought that was cool about Fear and Hunger is how at first you are presented with an item that appears to be useless, rotten meat. But once you play a bit more, you realize there is a very real and practical use for carrying rotten meat, which is to recruit Moonless early in the game. Her multiple attacks per turn and having another party member in the early game can be a huge help in navigating the dungeon. So that means that the player is incentivized to collect rotten meat in the early stages of the dungeon for use in the caverns. That means that each time you play the game and want to recruit Moonless, you have to collect rotten meat, and get the message that plays every time about a maggot running up your arm. The first time I read this, I was left wondering if the maggot would come back and affect my character later on in the game, but it never does. It's just flavor text. The developer of the game decided that the game would make you think of a maggot running up your arm every time you picked up a piece of rotten meat, just to burn that image of a maggot running up your arm into your mind. So no thank you, no maggots for me. Well, unless I'm recruiting Moonless, that is.
Next on our list, the human husk. If Nazra is in your party when you arrive at Mahabre, he'll mention that he knows these streets and alleyways very well, and that underneath the city you'll find his secret laboratory. Like Valte, he'd been researching how to create artificial life. Dropping rocks in modern Mahabre and listening for their sound, or lack of, you are able to find the secret entrance to his lab. In his lab, you'll find a prototype life imitation machine. By feeding it some of your blood, you are able to manufacture a human husk of yourself. A human husk is physically like a person, but dead or empty on the inside. They're able to drift around aimlessly, but have no conscience or thought. They are just empty husk of a human. Looking into the eyes of a human husk, you would notice the complete lack of thought or presence in them. But as simple as a human husk may appear, they do serve a very specific function in the Tower of Torment, where Chambara, the Tormented One, roams. Next on our list, Chambara and the Tower of Torment. Investigating the Tower of Torment, the player will very quickly find a machine that is meant to hoist up a person on two mechanical hooks connected to two different winces. It is a machine meant for sacrificing somebody to bring the tower back to life. Here, you have the choice of sacrificing a party member, or if you visited Nazra's secret lab, You can also sacrifice the human husk you created and not have to lose anybody in your party. After hoisting the human husk up on the sacrificial machine, the player will have their first encounter with Shambara, the Tormented One. Even looking at him makes me feel uncomfortable. You can tell of his suffering since he lacks skin, nose, and ears. His eyes, like the human husk, are empty black portals. No evidence of the poet that was originally Shambara is still outwardly visible anymore. He's a strong and dangerous enemy that is happy to beat your party with his fist. Sacrificing the human husk and tearing it apart will reactivate the tower and let the rivers of blood start flowing again. Attempting to leave the Tower of Torment, the player will have to cross this large pool of blood, and approaching it, the player will have a second encounter with Shambara, where he rises out of the pool of blood in a protective ring machine with 3 outer layers that are spinning around and able to crush anybody that gets close to it. After doing combat with him, he will recede into the pool of blood and you will get the soul of the tormented. When we ask the new gods about the Tormented One, they tell us, also known as Ron Shambara, when he was still walking among men as a mere mortal. Once a poet, he believes no great art can be achieved without pain and suffering. He now continues the same principles as a new god. From the wiki, Ron Shambara was once a mortal poet who believed that great art could only be born out of pain and suffering. Upon entering Mahabharata, the Fellowship became the new gods, with Ron taking the role of the Tormented One. He transformed into a skinless being with chains that inflict unending torture upon him for hundreds of years. In turn, he extended his pain and suffering to other creatures within the shrines of Mahabharata, including the Red Men, which leads us to the next item on our list, the Red Man. He who suffered the torture of the Tormented One for hundreds of years. With every passing year, its pain grows stronger. The new gods, when asked about the Red Man, the Red Men have been tortured for hundreds of years by Ron Shambara, the Tormented One. They can be found crawling and wandering the empty halls of the Temple of Torment in Mahabharata, and a second one can be found in the Tomb of the Gods in the past timeline. Their design resembles Shambara in that they appear to be a flayed man with his skin removed. We find them chained up, looking miserable and sad, simply sitting there accepting their fate. But more than anything else, their screeches are blood-curdling and can be heard echoing through the halls of torment. They are truly one of the most pitiful creatures we will encounter in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Next, the Penance Armor. The in-game book titled Penance Knights reads, "The Penance Knights are a special unit of the Vatican City that wear tailor-made armors. The Penance Knights are used in the most perilous tasks and missions where the chances of survival are especially low. Thus, the armor has been designed only to be put on. There is no removing it once one is chosen for the mission. The armor has rows of small spikes that drill into the skin of its wearer. The pain is meant to cleanse the mind for the task at hand and also heighten the fury in the midst of combat. Because of the nature of the Penance Knights and the Penance Armor, only convicts with life and death sentences are recruited to the unit. The recruits are given one last chance to repent their crimes and atone their sins before the Ascended One, Almer, passes on the final judgment. The Penance Armor can be said to be one of the better armors in the game, with some very strong advantages but also weaknesses. The main one is that it will constantly inflict the bleed status effect. That's why it's recommended to equip the Ring of Still Blood before climbing into the armor. Found on the floor where Torturer is, it is a disturbing piece of lore that is very fitting and in keeping of what we know about the Dark Vatican that exists in the universe of Fear and Hunger. Once a poor victim steps into the Penance Armor, they will never step out. It is a one-way trip. There is no surviving the armor once its spikes have clawed its way into your body, and each step causes agonizing pain to the wearer. The Maneba. Although the Maneba is a fairly low-level enemy that won't pose much of a threat to an experienced player, there are still a couple of things about this creature that I find unnerving or disturbing. The Maneba has two ways of getting into you. One telepathically into your thoughts, and one by the injection. The Maneba is a telepathic creature spawned by Rare and is able to glimpse inside your mind and communicate directly with you. This is unnerving because this creature is not natural of this world and is able to unsettle the player with its strange and ethereal thoughts that do not belong on this plane of existence. The second more direct way that the Maneba can impact the player is through the inject skill, which gives me shivers because it is able to inject worms into you. And nobody likes the thought of being injected with worms. The worms will increase the rate at which hunger accumulates in the player, on top of the effects the dungeon has already been having on the player. It doesn't have a great effect in gameplay, but just the thought of a monster injecting you with worms is something I find incredibly unsettling.
Next on our list of nasty things from Fear and Hunger, blood golems. These skinless blood golems can be summoned for a fight as they rise out of a pool of blood. They are extremely useful and tend to be great for endgame bosses that leave you with only 3 party members, such as going up against the god of Fear and Hunger, or Grogoroth if you had Nasra in your party. Extremely powerful, with double the regular HP of a character, and high attack considering that they are unarmed. They are a brick of hardened, skinless muscle that seems to be constantly bleeding. They are great tanks. It's a frequent strategy to summon a blood golem and then use pheromones on him to make him the party's tank and draw aggro, which puts his 200 HP to great use. Blood golems only last one fight, unlike skeletons and ghouls, and will dissipate after the fight is over. They are intrinsically nasty if for no other reason that they don't seem to have any skin, and they are magically born out of a puddle of blood. The Uterus Monster, yet another great example of the use of body horror in Fear and Hunger. The Uterus is really 2 enemies in one, with one being the mannequin that has sharp claws that can inflict the infection status effect and apply damage, and the other being the tanky cherub. The Uterus is another failed experiment of Altair, the Enlightened One, as he continues to try to find a way to create artificial life. During the fight, the cherub will drop out of the uterus's, its uterus, and start to crawl and stand up. The cherub will take the next few turns crawling up to the player's party, and once close enough will start attacking. If you are able to apply DPS fast enough, it's possible to kill the cherub before he is able to attack. Being able to birth another enemy during a fight makes the Uterus a standout among the monsters in this game. The purple organ bags that you have to cut to get to the gauntlet. So this one's kinda easy, yet difficult to describe. Throughout the dungeon, you will find 3 big purple pulsating wet bags of organs that need to be cut open to get access to the final endgame area, the gauntlet. Cutting open all 3 of them will grant the player access to the gauntlet, where the traces of Grogoroth or the god of Fear and Hunger can be found. The player will know if they have cut them all open because they will receive a message that the gigantic organic mass around it has stopped pulsating after cutting the last one. I think we can easily say that one of the nastier things in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger are these massive fleshy bags of nondescript organs. And the last one for today's video, the God of Fear and Hunger. The God of Fear and Hunger is considered to be one of the true final bosses, at least narratively. Although there are other bosses that might be more difficult or tougher, the God of Fear and Hunger wraps up the story. This is a unique boss fight. First, you have to escort the girl to the bottom of the dungeon and through the gauntlet, all the while she's taking up a slot in your party. If you reach the mound of bodies at the very end of the game, you will trigger her transformation into the God of Fear and Hunger that ushers in the Cruel era. And this will trigger the final boss fight needed to get ending A. Here we have a 5-stage boss fight, as we will see the little girl gradually evolve into her final form. Each transformation seemed painful, and the in-game text describing how cold the little girl feels. Each stage being more monstrous and disturbing than the previous, little by little becoming more of a distorted female figure, culminating in her true final form of the God of Fear and Hunger. In her final form, she will only execute self-mutilation attacks, as she needs to harness the pain. After a few self-mutilation actions, she will use her gaze upon the party, which is possible to instill such horror as to instantly kill the party if the coin flip is failed. And with that, I'm wrapping up this list of 20 nasty things found in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Let me know in the comments what got to you in Fear and Hunger that I missed out on this list. And let me know if you'd like to see another one of these videos. I still have plenty more on my list, and there's still Fear and Hunger 2 Termina to do. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to support my work and the channel. Thank you very much. Take care, and later.
Hi, hello, and welcome. So for today's video, to keep things interesting and prevent repeating too much, I'll be focusing more on late game content and the content that I just hadn't seen in my different runs of Fear and Hunger. I hadn't beat Sylvian, so to get footage for this video, I did a terror and starvation run to the Void to fight her and experience it firsthand. For no particular reason, I thought it'd be cool to use all 4 of the playable characters. Thanks to the subreddit and the wiki.gg, as always, for being a resource. So let's get started on today's list of 20 more nasty things in Fear and Hunger 1. Starting off with 1. The Mumbler. The Mumbler and its design. Continuing the theme of Fear and Hunger's experimentation with horror that draws on body horror, let's talk about the Mumbler. I don't think I need to censor these guys, but where the design draws inspiration from is pretty obvious. Another example of transposing genital imagery onto the denizens of the dungeon. Another layer of horror that is the Fear and Hunger experience. I thought the Mumblers were particularly annoying, but the normal variants aren't too much of a threat. Found in the thicket, they can be mostly easy to avoid by using the multiple paths through the different levels of the thicket. If engaged in combat, their damage and HP isn't too high. If talked to, they don't reply. Their head will spew poison at the party if attacked. Poisoning is the main threat that the Mumbler will present. Nothing in the thicket or the lore seems to indicate that they can form groups or society. They just seem like empty-minded abominations. A variant of the Mumbler can be found that poses a greater threat and does show some signs of intelligence, the Greater Mumbler. The community discussion on Reddit and the wiki section for the lore of the Great Mumbler suggests that the Mumblers are followers of the God of the Depths. Like other followers, they are either insects or beings that are, quote, forsaken and forgotten, that fulfill some task in the dungeon assigned to them by the God of the Depths. The Greater Mumbler poses a more serious threat, and can be easily identified by the ringing of the bells that they are carrying. In one hand, they carry a bell that, if rung, will drain mind, and a green sacky thing that the Mumbler can use to burn you. Fortunately, intelligent application of damage can render him mostly harmless with some luck in the first turn. So between the design of the Mumblers, their odd lore, and dedication to the God of the Depths, along with their relatively minor yet very real threat they present, I wanted to start today's list with the Mumblers. Moving on to the Cave Mother. One of the only early game creatures on today's list, we have the Cave Mother. She can be found fairly early on in the game by taking the elevator down to the level 4 caverns. She is what has spawned all the little cave gnomes flying around the last 2 levels of the dungeon. If the player approaches a certain ledge on this level, they'll hear the flapping of wings descending and approaching the party, prompting phase 1 of the fight against her. Taking out her wings, she'll start to fall and give the impression that the fight is over. Before the party is able to walk far from the Cave Mother encounter, the party will be charged by the now wingless Cave Mother, triggering the second phase of the encounter. Finishing the fight with the Cave Mother gives the option of searching her body
from which the party can retrieve the gnome egg. Not far from this encounter, a second cave mother can be found chained to the cavern walls. We don't know why or get any indication how she ended up there, but seeing how she's chained up and secreting yellow ooze, it's a safe guess that someone is harvesting her. Number 3. The Skin Granny. Making it to Mahabre, ascending the long stairs up to the Tower of the Endless. If the player attempts to rest and save, the flashback sequences will be triggered. These flashbacks flesh out the motivations and the history of the main characters. The last one we see is the tragic events that befell Rag and his village in Odengard. Entering the only visible structure that we are led to by a trail of blood and bodies, the party will encounter the Skin Granny. Initially appearing as a harmless old lady, she'll grant the party one free action to prepare for the fight as she mutates to her true form. The new gods tell us about the Skin Granny, a myth passed on by the wild men of the north and those who live in Odengard and its surrounding areas. The myth is typically told to new generations as a cautionary tale on what happens if you abandon your family and leave for greener pastures. The black is said to creep from the dark corners of your home cabin, slowly nibbling the form of your beloved ones. The creature is of course just a myth, but the tale lives on strong in the consciousness of the northern folk, and often in nightmares, the creature has a vivid presence. The new gods, when asked about the Skin Granny. The new gods suggest the Skin Granny manifests when one leaves their family to look for greener pastures. Perhaps her presence is making a statement on Rag's traveling to Vinland, where him and his countrymen found the cube of the depths that triggered the shit show that is the events of Fear and Hunger. The Skin Granny's main threat is her ability to use her multiple arms to try to cut the player. Fortunately, you will have one free turn at the beginning of the encounter to cast buffs or status effects. With some luck, this encounter can be fairly straightforward, but still unsettling due to the design and name of the Skin Granny. The Cave Dwellers. The Cave Dwellers are the inhabitants of the only population center, or town, in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Blue-skinned in appearance and muscular and rock-hard in description, the Cave Dwellers live in a village beneath the mines, and they guard the Cube of the Depths, which started the decay that has spread through the dungeon. The Cave Dwellers got the Cube of the Depths by trading provisions with a desperate Captain Rudimer, whose mental state was already in decay. The Cave Dweller village also has one of the few merchants in the game that will trade for the silver coins the player has been picking up throughout the dungeon. Initially peaceful, the Cave Dwellers are not aggressive at first towards the player. From Darcy, we hear, "I found this underground village full of those things. They live in savage ways. They are but a pack of heretics. The things they did to me. When I got to see one of their primitive rituals, I had to step in. I cut down a couple of them, and then they chased me here." If the player stops the attack on Darcy, or takes the Cube of the Depths, the entire village will aggro and start hunting the player on sight. Though they are strong and muscular, fortunately they are unarmored. Taking out their arm that is holding a weapon will usually render them harmless in a fight, making it easy to run in and grab the cube and then fight your way out of the village. Another way of triggering an aggressive response from the Cave Dwellers is to interrupt this couple from, well, interrupt them from what they are currently doing. Not sure why you want to, but hey. According to the wiki, on any playthrough, there is a 10% chance that the player will find the village of Cave Dwellers massacred and the village will be patrolled by moonless guards instead. If the player is traveling to Mahabre, you should be sure to grab the rope and use it to descend to Wolfmask Orgy, and then to level 7 of the Catacombs, where you can find the Ancient Door. Number 5. The Cockroach King. A little known servant of the God of the Depths can be found hidden in the thicket. If on the first level, the player pushes their way into a series of secret doors in the walls, they'll be able to drop down a level and have an audience with the Cockroach King. You are able to speak with him if you have the mastery over insect skills. He'll call you a filthy human and demand that you kneel before him. If you play along, he'll give you an opportunity to serve him and move up in the ranks, and he gives you the title of Peasant. The Cockroach King gives you the task of going to the surface and killing the butterfly at his request. He mentions that they cannot allow him to finish his metamorphosis and fly away with butterfly wings. Completing this task moves the player up in rank to a noble and increases affinity with the god of the depths. Completing the second task to kill a visitor to the dungeon who has long hair and is a priest of destruction will move the player further up into the ranks of whatever the Cockroach King is king of, and will increase affinity with the god of the depths once more. The Cockroach King then mentions that his people have always wanted a new flesh of a home that has magical powers. I don't think Enki would approve. Alright, next on our list is our Lord and Savior, Almer. One of the things I like in games is when secrets hold further secrets, waiting for a curious player to come by and find them. In the tunnel area that leads from the bottom of the dungeon to Mahabre, there is a 3-part puzzle that I call the Push Blue Statues onto Gold Square puzzle. Clever, I know. Solving it will open a non-assuming door that leads to the Tomb of the Gods, a modest location housing the body of none other than Almer the Ascended, the messianic figure in the religion of the world of fear and hunger. Almer was born a regular person in the city of Jataya. He eventually became a Christ-like religious figure, leading 12 apostles who would spread his teachings. He eventually upset the powers that be and was crucified. Upon dying, he ascended to divinity in Mahabre and was able to resurrect. In a deviation from the traditional Christ story, he came back and took revenge on the kings and Pharisees that condemned him. His body can be found in the ancient tomb in the Tomb of the Gods. There's no real gameplay purpose to his body being found here, other than lore and ambiance, but there is one fun interaction. If the player has the necromancy skill available to them, they will get the option to use the necromancy on the old god. A coin flip is then triggered to see if the spell is successful. As always, it's whenever I'm recording that I get crazy odds and never get the coin flip that I need. But nevertheless, I persisted until the necromancy spell was cast, and several bottles of vodka and ale have been consumed. Not a bad time, I guess. The only effect that the necromancy spell has is to revive a part of Almer, his equipment or package after casting the spell. It seems like Almer is happy to see you, or he has something in his pocket. So yeah, that's in the game. Unique if nothing else. I've never seen a game where you can get a god at wrecked. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any other games that lets you get god hard. The Lady of the Moon. Next door to where Almer can be found, in the Tomb of the Gods, there is a door behind which we'll find several Manebas, servants of the moon god Rare, the jellyfish-like creatures that are encountered in the first levels of the dungeon. Past these moon servants, we find another type of moon-loving jellyfish, the Lady of the Moon. The Lady of the Moon will rise out of the green hue in the corner of the room and a battle sequence will initiate, but the lady will not attack. If you use the talk skill, more of her intents and purposes can be learned. If you ask her about her origin, she says that she comes from the green. If you ask her who she is, she says that she's a servant of the moon god, Rare. She mentions that like the moon god, she doesn't believe that humans should have the same rights as gods. If the little girl is in the party, she will offer you a trade. If you give her the smallest one among your party, the lady will heal the wounds of the party and make everyone whole, reversing any dismemberment or physical damage to the members of the party. Like another creature of Rare, Pocket Cat, the Lady of the Moon is trying to stop any human of divine origin from ascending to godhood, so that they may never rival the powers of the moon god Rare or the old gods. Number 8. The White Angel and his splitting attack. Walking the alleyways of Mahabre in the past, approaching the Tower of Torment, we'll see these white figures that appear to have been cut open at the chest and chained to the wall. Initially inert, after defeating the Tormented Soul, you'll notice that they are gone while their chains remain. From here on in, several white angels can be found roaming the alleyways of past Mahabre. They are a very real threat since they use both of their sharp wings to attack the party, but the real threat comes from their coin flip attack, where they would jump into the air and come down on one of the party members with full force and weight, cleaving a party member clean in half with a single strike. Any attempts to reason with the White Angel or learn more about them by talking are futile. since the White Angel will not reveal any information to you. Fortunately, dealing with a White Angel grants the White Angel Soul, which increases a party member's agility to 20, granting it first action in a turn, but also a second extra turn, dramatically increasing damage output and survivability for the party. Number 9. The Witch. The first time most players will encounter the Witch will be at the beginning of the game, when the Witch briefly teleports the player to another realm. If the player is quick, they can escape this little pocket dimension and make their way back to the dungeon without fighting the Witch. Fighting the Witch at this time is generally a poor idea, since the player will not have the party or equipment to take her down. The Black Witch is a servant of Grogoroth, like the Black Priest. Having sold its soul to the blood arts long ago, the Witch lets us know that it's devoted to the point of not fearing death. Fortunately, you can fulfill this and pay back the Witch later on in the game. If you're playing on Terror and Starvation mode, the Witch can later be found at the Grand Library in the present. But now, the party should have a fuller party and better equipment. If the player approaches one of the red ritual circles, the Witch will appear and charge the party, triggering a fight. With some luck and good gear, here, the player can take revenge on the Witch for every time the Witch taunted you as you started a new run and entered the dungeon and were teleported to the Witch's pocket dimension. The Lizard Mages. The Lizard Mage is one of the last threats the player will face on their journey to the God of Fear and Hunger. Only found in the Gauntlet, they will attack the player and their party as they make their way through the final floor of the dungeon. The new gods tell us an act of love between the Lizard Man and the Yellow Mage. The being that came from the act seems to share the intelligence of both worlds. However, it does not know for certain which tribe it belongs to. Thus, it wanders the darkness alone. The Lizard Mage will appear in combat armed with a sword that can slash and dismember the party members, and a staff they can use to cast Locust Swarm on the party. I think the Lizard Mage belongs on the list of nasty things, if for no other reason than the thought of a marriage ritual between the Yellow Mage and the Lizard Man. But each their own, I guess. Lizard love, what can I say? The Double Crow Mauler. In my last video of Fear and Hunger, we covered the Crow Mauler, so for the follow-up, I thought we should talk about the Double Crow Mauler. Like the regular Crow Mauler, he is an intimidating sight. Armed with a mauler, like the original, but now with two heads that can potentially deal out twice as many peck attacks. He is found if you fall down through a hole in the floor while navigating the traps in the gauntlet. Defeating him gives us the Crow Emblem key, which is redundant at this point since you can't leave the gauntlet, and also the Captain's Diary number 3, which details Captain Rudimer's descent into madness as he kept seeing visions of crows and started slipping more and more into the darkness. As far as I can tell, there's no real lore reason as to why there'd be a double-headed crow mauler in the bottom of the dungeon, but hey, it does make for a cool endgame enemy. As you can see on screen, the two biggest threats to the crow mauler, its ability to do a one-hit kill using the peck attack, and the ability to blind the player using the swarm of crow attacks. Since we're already talking about the gauntlet, number 12 on our list is the traps in the gauntlet. So this one might just be me wanting to rant, but either way, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the traps in the gauntlet are nasty, especially if you imagine how they would operate in real life. I mean, swinging blades, spikes rising from the floor, farting statues are all menacing and gruesome in their own right. In particular, the swinging blades gave me trouble at first. For some reason my brain just farted out trying to get the timing right, but practiced a few times and it's simple enough. Also, it seems to be a trend that the last areas in a Fear and Hunger game will have insta-death traps, kind of like the flaming Bremen soldiers in Termina. Another factor in the ickiness of the gauntlet is the insect-covered floors, similar to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which scarred me psychologically as a child. As you move around the level, you'll hear the chittering of the insects and take small bits of damage from the floor that's completely covered in a swarm of bugs. For some reason, that thought just really stays with me and gets under my skin anytime I'm playing through the gauntlet. Now, moving on to the other endgame area in Fear and Hunger 1, the Void. Starting off with number 13, the Molded. From the new gods we get the miserable creation that is but a mockery of human beings. It is a simple being created by a new god that once existed who was trying to achieve the power of the older gods with limited understanding. a nasty inhabitant of the void. The player will encounter these tormented sacks of flesh wandering the lunar surface. Their descriptions from the new gods informed us that they are failed experiments made by those that didn't fully comprehend what they were doing or the power that they were wielding. Attempting to speak to them in combat, you get the message. The creature clearly tries to say something, but its wall of flesh prevents the sound from carrying over. Or, whimpering muffled sounds can be heard from behind the walls of flesh. Inspecting the bodies, or mounds of flesh after fighting them, yields a description of the smell of sulfur that they leave behind. These tormented beings are a testament to the cost of hubris, of new gods meddling with forces they don't understand in order to satisfy their egos and curiosity after ascending on the golden throne. The Blight. Before men, the lizard men roamed as the dominating life form. Like us, they too desired to ascend higher. What remains of those ancient times are the forms. The new gods, when asked about the Blight, found in the void, these eyeless, soft-looking pterodactyls can be found flying across the green hue, or perched on top of the rock formations. If the player is trying to record footage for a video on Fear and Hunger, these creatures will be aware of the fact and leave the player alone, denying the player the opportunity to get footage for a fight. Like so many of the endgame enemies, the Blights can pose a threat at first, since the player will spawn into the void after ascending from the Golden Throne, alone with their party scattered. With the HP that they have, it makes it hard to one-shot, but the Blight becomes far more manageable once the player has managed to gather their party members. While a serious threat, the Blight won't be the creature that makes the player feel the need to run and hide here in the green fog of this otherworldly lunar surface. If you explore the void thoroughly, or just get lucky I guess, you might run into a baby Blight. Not much information is available. Presumably, it fell off of a ridge or cliff, since there doesn't appear to be anything to indicate a ground level nest for the Blights. Hitting it doesn't seem to do anything either. The interesting question though is this baby Blight a baby lizard man that ascended, or are the Blights in the void able to reproduce? Number 15. The Greater Blight. In spite of the nasty horrors we've encountered in this video, the undisputed king of the void is the Greater Blight. Like the smaller Blight, the Greater Blight is created when some lizard men, or lizard women I suppose, ascend to godhood. The Greater Blight is a unique enemy that can't be seen on the overview map, but rather it's heard. When exploring the void, the player will get messages such as, you get a primal urge to hide somewhere. The terrifying presence is closing in on you. There is something huge close by in the shadows, while being followed with increasingly tense rumbling of footsteps. The player will need to find a hiding spot. If found, the encounter can be skipped as the Greater Blight fails to find the party. If the player doesn't hide, an unskippable combat encounter starts. The Greater Blight appears as a giant scaleless T-Rex with no visible eyes. The Greater Blight is giant, tanky, and imposing, easily wrecking any but the best equipped parties. First, the party will have a few turns as the Great Blight approaches. This is a good time to use abilities like Darcy's fast attack or any other buffs that would help. In these first turns, the Greater Blight is beyond physical attack range, but can still be attacked with magic. Once in range, he will have one arm and two legs that he will attack with. Focusing damage on the limbs can limit the damage your party takes, but if you are able to damage him enough and keep your party alive, he is beatable. Although, you'd be doing it just to do it, since he doesn't drop any rare items or anything else that will motivate you to fight him. So, unless you want a challenge, you're best off hiding when he's close by. Also, fun fact, the sprite looks like it bugged out when I was recording the footage, so at the end, it just looks like we're fighting a flying T-Rex head. I thought that was kind of funny. Sylvian. the biggest threat in the void, only found dwelling in the green hue of this area. These are just the traces of Sylvan, so not the true goddess, but rather a weakened apparition of her that's been left behind with the passage of time. I'm going to be a little bit light on the lore for Sylvan since I've covered this god a few times in my other videos, and I don't want to repeat myself too much, but Sylvan is the god of creation, the antithesis to Grogoroth, the god of destruction. They are both primordial old gods that rule over the world of fear and hunger, representing basic aspects of reality. The god of love and fertility will be found on the path to the new god. She physically appears as a rib cage with a few tentacles and other appendages growing from it, along with Rare, the machine god, the god of fear and hunger, and the traces of Grogoroth. The traces of Sylvan is another god or deity that can be fought and bested by mere mortals, following in the grand tradition of so many JRPGs, in which humans try to kill a god. She will attack with her many tentacles, sapping the party's health. The color of the unknown attack will drain the party's mind, making spells and healing more difficult. And lastly, Sylvan will grow a tumor that over a few turns will take a form of one of the 4 player characters and start attacking. The Kahara tumor will use critical stab attacks, Darcy's will do leg sweep attacks, Enki's might cast Hurting or Locust Swarm, and Rags will fire iron arrows. But if the player is well equipped and you play your cards right, the traces of Sylvan are defeatable. After her traces dissipate, the path to the new ascended god is unlocked. Number 17, climbing the Tower of Endless over and over again. So this might be another one of my rants. Ludonarrative cohesion or resonance is something important for a game to really flesh out the vibe, ambiance, or the feel of a game. Meaning that a game should try to have its mechanical themes or challenges reflect the themes and challenges of the narrative. The first Dark Souls did this great, making you feel you were in a vast, dying world mechanically, which is then reinforced with the narrative setting and visual themes of the game. Another example of ludonarrative cohesion is the fucking Tower of the Endless, where you have to climb all the stairs and the loops every time. There isn't a shortcut or an elevator to unlock at the top after climbing up once. Making you climb up and down really makes the player feel and be aware that this tower is tall, and contrary to the name, it is actually endless. But that's a pedantic point. Did you need to trigger the flashback dream sequences to get access to Francois and the Golden Palace? Well, climb to the top of the tower. Oh wait, you're in the wrong time period, so you have to climb back down. Use the beacon of the depths and then climb back up. Okay, you finish the flashback sequence and then climb back down, only to realize you forgot the miasma, blue sin, or the eastern sword, or any other item anywhere else in the dungeon. So you climb back up to the top of the tower to use the portal. Okay, now you actually have everything. So you climb back down, but then you forgot to save the game. So you need to climb back up the tower to save the game and then climb back down to continue the game. All I'm saying is that the Tower of the Endless is probably why most of the characters in the game look like they have never skipped leg day with their rock hard glutes and legs. Them butts. Francois and regret. A lot has already been said about Francois, the dominating soul. In a way, he does kinda serve as the main antagonist. If you could say that Fear and Hunger has a true central antagonist, he is the gatekeeper to the void and all the endings that will lead you there. He serves kind of a stand-in for the corruption of a person in the pursuit of power. But here's a bit I noticed on my last playthrough that somehow hadn't really stuck out to me about him. To fight him in the past, you must first encounter him in the present. In present Mahabre, he appears as a worn-out man who spends his days breeding dogs. Disheveled and emaciated, he's found sitting with his dogs. Time has granted him wisdom and moderation. He talks about the ages past and how he's now aware of his arrogance, how he was presumptuous to assume he'd be able to challenge the old gods, which represent fundamental concepts of reality itself. His dreams of domination were just an illusion. He is nothing more than just another pawn in a long series of pawns in the machinations of the old gods. He now understands the futility of his younger, ambitious self, and now he is an old man looking back at his foolishness with regret. And who can say they have no regrets looking back? But even the most powerful among us are powerless before time. We can't go back and change the things that we regret. We can only learn to make peace with them and try to move on, if nothing else, as a wiser, more knowledgeable individual. So, the older Francois asks you to go back in time and stop him when he was young. When we encounter him when he's younger, he talks that he only needs a few hundred years to complete his supremacy, but we already know how this plays out. How do you teach something when it seems that only time and experience can do that? I mean, how much did you listen when you were younger? I know I didn't. How much did you have to learn on your own, in spite of well-intentioned warnings from others? I know I had to run face first into the wall a few dozen times before I realized I should really start listening to others more. But alas, we know that young Francois' mission and ambitions are futile. Aren't most quests for total domination doomed to fail eventually? The King in Yellow. The literary figure of the King in Yellow has almost become a trope in survival horror these last few years, being a prominent theme in both Signalis and Fear and Hunger recently, arguably in Dark Souls as well. I've been fascinated with this figure since hearing about it, a mysterious play about a king that drives anyone insane that reads it. The mystery of the king is almost as alluring as actually knowing about him. The lack of lore and information about him only deepens the mystery. In the game, the King in Yellow will only appear if the player assists the guard to his ultimate vain and selfish goal of ascending to godhood, encountered as a final boss leading to the sea endings. Canonically, we know that Legard does in fact ascend to godhood and survives the events of Fear and Hunger 1. He then proceeds to spend hundreds of years working in the shadows on his next plan of attack to take out the old gods, to free humanity from their grasp. In combat, he's notable for being one of the opponents with the greatest ability to heal himself, with both the asterisk he can summon and the snake having healing abilities. He will attack with his sword, and every few turns, he'll use the Salvation coin flip attack, which will blind the player if failed. Either way the fight goes, the guard ascends to godhood, fulfilling his ambitions and plans, and setting the stage for Fear Hunger 2 Termina. 20. The Gods of the Depth. The Gods of the Depth is found in the Cave Dweller village, near where the Cube of the Depths is found. The God of the Depths serves as a gate to the Gauntlet, the bottommost level of the dungeon. To get access, you'll need to cut the 3 purple organ bags throughout the dungeon. At a glance, the appearance of the God of the Depths appears to be like a primordial and colossal fish standing upright, with a path leading up to its mouth. But it seems like the design of the God of the Depths has a real-world inspiration. Apparently, the god was inspired by this picture of the sunken USS Saratoga. Here's a few interesting facts about the USS Saratoga, mostly from the Wikipedia article. The USS Saratoga was a Lexington-class aircraft carrier built for the United States Navy during the 1920s. She was converted into one of the Navy's first aircraft carriers. The Saratoga was assigned to the Pacific Fleet for her entire career and for the duration of World War II. In mid-1946, the ship was a target for a nuclear weapons test in Bikini Atoll. So, Godzilla connection confirmed, maybe? Anyway, that's the video for today. As always, I appreciate your time. Please don't forget to like, comment, and all that if you'd like to help the video with the algorithm, which I would appreciate. But anyways, thank you very much, take care, have a good one, and later.
In today's video, we're going over a list of 20 things I thought were pretty nasty in Fear Hunger 2 Termina. There's a lot more than 20 in the game, but these were just the first 20 I thought of. I will be doing more, so please leave suggestions for items on my next list in the comments. The intro. Before anything else, I'd like to say I really liked the intro sequence for Termina. It's brief, atmospheric, and it really gives you a taste of what's to come, but without revealing too much. The game opens with the player character having drifted asleep
On the train heading for Preheville, lulled to sleep by the peaceful and rhythmic motion of the train swaying back and forth, the player awakes suddenly and sees the blue moth girl, Rayla, run off down the train wagon. We can see other characters like Tanaka and Marco also asleep on the train, but trying to rouse them fails. They are in a unnaturally deep sleep. Proceeding down the hall, we see a makeshift constructed doorway that seems to lead to a dark portal where the train's wall should be. Taking it, the game lets us know that we are no longer in the train, but somewhere new. A wooden workshop with benches littered with small gray cube figurines. The deformed janitor makes his appearance and forces us to sit down to assemble cubes. After making a few, we can see that Rayla attempts to make a run for it. Following her, we're caught by the janitor. After a fight, the janitor severs the player's legs, saying, "Let's see you dash around like a little jailbird without these chicken thighs of yours," and leaves you to get back to work. Here, we are viscerally introduced to the dismemberment sound that we will be hearing more than a few times throughout the game. Feeling completely helpless, wandering around the room, looking for and failing to find an exit or help, the player will experience a sudden headache accompanied by a severe ear-piercing sound. Losing consciousness momentarily, the player has a premonition of the future, of briefly being in the Hall of Gods, surrounded by the many incarnations of the new gods. A flash, the player is whole again, with all of their limbs. But now we are standing on top of a massive tower overlooking the surrounding town. Perkele, a oddly dressed man with a feather-covered robe and a purplish hue to his skin, gives us the introduction to the festival of Termina and tells us what the player will need to know to survive this grisly game. The moon-scorched villagers. Approaching the city, we start to get an idea of what happened to the local population when the moon scorching happened and the festival was unleashed onto Preheville. We see a few surviving townspeople standing catatonically looking at the sky, scratching at the flesh on their faces, and sometimes peeling strips of it off. Talking to them, they appear to be half distant, talking about the moon scorching everything and the green hue that came with it. They are the last survivors of the swamp dwellers that lived here. Talking to them in combat reveals little other information other than they are digging their nails into their faces. One of them reveals that he wants you to hurt him. Just to end this for him, he yells, "Take it off," like it's burning. He's talking about his skin, that his skin is burning. None of these moon-scorched villagers fight back at all. They're just passively waiting for the end, that they hope is sooner rather than later. There is only one moral and humanitarian thing to do here. You whip out the bench grinder and make it quick. Not wanting to leave anything useful behind, you then take out the bone saw and remove the heads from the villagers. Battered as they may be, they will still make a good offering to the new gods. Dinner with the mayor. Dinner with the mayor sounds like something top students of the local high school would get for winning the national spelling bee. But obviously, things are a bit more sinister in Fear and Hunger 2. Sitting down for dinner with either the gentleman or a moon-scorched Hendrik, depending on how things play out, we are treated to this monster's idea of a fine meal. The mayor will present you with some nauseating variations on what he calls exquisite local cuisine. Here, the player will have to weight their options, trying to anticipate what the gentleman wants to hear. Giving him the wrong answer will prompt him to fly into a rage and attack the player. While he isn't particularly difficult, the player will initially encounter him early on in the game, before having much of a chance to get better equipment or a full party. The image of each of the different food items are very off-putting and very phallic. The sausage thing and the mushroom look particularly unpleasant. Not the type of thing you'd like to see when you sit down for dinner. But the gentleman seems delighted and is loving every second of the meal, like it was Thanksgiving. And Grandma didn't fucking overcook the turkey for once. And it's actually nice, juicy, and has flavor. Personally, I'm more of a pork guy myself. Turkeys don't seem to have too many redeeming qualities. Navigating the conversation and telling the mayor what he wants to hear 3 times will befriend him and prompt him to give the player one of the 2 keys needed to get past the gate and head into the city. The Woodsman. He is a man that lives in the woods, and he makes one hell of an entrance the first time we encounter him, stepping out of the fog to decapitate a villager in a single swipe. He is scary, nasty, and oddly tragic. We encounter him right at the beginning of the game, not far from where the train stopped. We find out from the wretched being in the slums that the woodsman eagerly embraced the festival of Termina and took out a large part of the slum dwellers himself. He wears an open trench coat, revealing his alien face hugger appendage. He is like a nightmare combination of a trench coat flasher and xenomorph. In combat, you'll want to take out his axe first, since it's very capable of dismembering any members of your party. Taking him out, and hopefully dodging his appendage when it lunges at you, you'll get the basement key to unlock the basement in his house nearby. Entering the building, we see that the basement door has multiple chains on it going back and forth and is barred shut. There's also a blood trail leading up to it. The design of the locks on this door is kind of reminiscent on the locks in the apartment in Silent Hill 4. Descending into the basement, we see a bloody outline of a sigil to rare and a corpse sitting in a chair next to it. Here, we learn about the infidelity that occurred between the woodsman and his wife, and the goat, when she cheated on him with the goat outside, though that goat is not a mere goat as may appear at first. So in retaliation, the woodsman kills his wife in rage. We can find a letter of hers admitting to it and taunting the woodsman about her new lover's girth. If we use a chalk to draw the sigil of rare in the ritual circle, we can enter the other realm and talk to the mysterious man in black. He asks us if we believe in darkness and talks about the contrast of the dark with the light, how one complements and requires the other. He laments humanity turning to and embracing science, and he says that he will help us out on our quest, and then promptly disappears. Don't you just hate it when you're speaking to somebody and they just disappear into the ether? Going back outside, the goat is now a recruitable member for your party, and will help you along your journey to decipher the mysteries of Termina and the festival. Alright, next is the public toilet, an unasked for throwback to the original game, and like in the first game, it serves no purpose. If you jump in there, there's no way of climbing out. But to be fair, the game never gives you any indication that you should jump down there, and it promptly lets you know that it was a poor decision. If you can think of any possible reason why jumping down this toilet is a good idea, go ahead and put it in the comments. I'm very curious. But either way, gamers are known for their curiosity, and if a game gives you the option to do something, somebody will eventually do it. There are a few more unnerving little details that the game slides in. First of all, why is it public? Don't get me wrong, Perheville's stuck in the past, but it doesn't seem that stuck in the past. It doesn't seem like it would have been much work to make more stalls. Also, the game does mention semen traces everywhere, and why? I don't want to know, really. And I'm okay with that. Let's move on to the next one. Dirty toilet paper. In both Funger 1 and 2, the player will frequently have to deal with the bleed status effect, which is not surprising given the nature of the game, from either stepping on a nail or losing another limb. The player will always have a need to have cloth fragments on hand, but in Termina, a new item that can stop bleeding was introduced. Behold, the dirty toilet paper. Would you rather bleed to death or die from an infection? Dirty toilet paper item gives you that option, which I'm sure everybody has been clamoring for. But if you have a green herb and dirty toilet paper, you can treat bleeding, but you'll get infected. Because, well, you treated an open wound with dirty toilet paper that you found in the trash. But then you can use the green herb to treat the infection. So it's all good. Fortunately, I'm currently spending a lot of time with my 1-year-old, and I can tell you from personal experience that the in-game sprite art for the item is far less graphic than it could be. At least the item is not called a dirty diaper. Alright, next. The department store. I do appreciate the build-up to this one. The player has just made it to the Preheville Bop in the center of the city. and is now properly starting the exploration of the center of the city while locating the 3 effigies. The anticipation builds at the thought of what lies in wait as you go through the environment that once appeared normal, but now is eerily quiet, with only weird creatures found in the fog. You enter a department store, seemingly the most normal location so far, with this distinctive sense of modernity and normality. A coffee bar, stools, wide tall ceiling, fixtures, lightings, rugs, but you can hear a distant echo, a yelling in the far distance. As you go deeper into the department store, they get louder. It's screaming. It's coming from the top of the department store. Ascending the stairs, the screaming gets clearer, becoming more of a noise rather than a distant echo. Reaching the top, we are greeted with the grisly display that we have been hearing since we entered the department store. I'm not sure how much I'll be able to show you, since it's a bit gruesome, but let me say, you find a group of people suspended from the ceiling with chains, most seemingly still alive and moving, some being tormented, like the human husk did in the Tower of the Tormented in the original game. And just a note, if the player keeps exploring, they will find a useful ring at the very top being held by what seems to be a desiccated corpse. Caligura. I just do not like this dude. How hateful he is stands in stark contrast with how endearing the other 13 participants of the festival are. Even his character portrait looks off. He looks like a deep one from a H.P. Lovecraft story rather than a human male. And he is absolutely unpleasant. He's either trying to assault you while you're sleeping or telling you to go fuck yourself. And he's not even witty or clever about it. At least Pav comes off as an intriguing character that makes you wonder what his deal, and is far more eloquent. Caligura is just malice incarnate, like something the sulfur god would have spawned onto the earth to punish humanity. Caligura is the one participant of the festival that really goes all in during the events of the game. He tries to kill Tanaka, Marco, Levi, while assaulting a few other characters if he's given the chance. He is the worst of the participants in Gear and Funger too. It's almost like, what if humans are the real monsters? Someone should make a movie about that. Nazra's head. In kind of a funny follow-up from the first game, we have the appearance of Nazra's raisin-looking head, which now looks like a dried-up raisin. This confirms that he did indeed get burnt up by the traces of Grogoroth in the first game. Nazra's head is found by Osa in his backstory. Osa left his hometown to continue his studies into religion and the otherworldly, which brings Osa to the kingdom of Wrong Dawn. Having joined an expedition to the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, Osa enters the ruins of the dungeon by himself, feeling the call of the other world. Osa finds Nazra's head under a pile of rocks in the dungeon. During the events of the game and the Festival of Termina, Nazra's head is relegated to being an item that can sometimes reflect spells back at the caster, which can be kinda useful in some situations, and in the final confrontation at the tower. If playing as Osa, Nazra will become an annoying and crude backseat driver during the game, constantly cursing at Osa, but sometimes with some insight and history. Nazra will yell out obscenities to Osa every time the poor man takes a break and closes his eyes for some rest. At the very end of the game, we do get an interesting scene where Nazra and Lagarde follow up the discussion they had in the first game. In part 2, they'll debate about the nature of humanity and the meaning of chaos and order. Should humanity be confined to a rigid system of order, or is humanity chaotic and needs to be unbound to fully develop? The Vial. Continuing the old tradition of spraying fish with pesticide, we first encountered a Vial in the slums, spraying down local catch. A dweller of the slums, he wears a pig mask that has fused with his face, meaning that it cannot be taken off. It's part of his face. He carries a pesticide tank that he wields as a melee weapon and sprays any survivors down with poison. Not much is known about the Vial, how he survived the festival, what he's doing, what drives him, why he's spraying down fish with pesticide, or why he's wearing a pig mask and how did it fuse with his face. But his presence is troubling, and his corruption is emblematic of the fall of Preheville. Poe Death Animation. In central Preheville, in the back of the store Dr. Kiefer's Tricks and Magic, there is a magic lamp resting on the desk. Walking up to it and interacting with it, you have the option of rubbing it. Afterwards, a disturbance in the radio next to you will be noticeable. Hanging around too long, we see a Poe or a ghost materialize out of the radio and start chasing you after he sees you. Fighting him, he only has one attack, and that's to try to catch you in the grasp of a genie, a coin flip attack. If he's successful, well, he will do this. A side note here, when I was recording footage for this segment, I had some of the best luck I've ever had with coin flips, and just wouldn't die. I must have won like 4 coin flips in a row, which has about a 6% probability of occurring. But I always find it entertaining how you always seem to win coin flips when you don't need to. It's like the game knows. So you can see this one took a little bit longer to get the footage. I was like, Ghost, I just need footage of you sticking your hand up my butt. Moving on to the next nasty thing depicted in Fear Hunger 2 Termina, and that's addiction. Getting real here for a second, through Levi, we get a glimpse of what it is to deal with addiction. Addiction is a neurophysical disorder characterized by strong physical or psychological urge or need to do something or use something, which can be a problem when that compulsion gets in the way of one's long-term goals or ability to function in a healthy and happy fashion. Some forms of addiction are more accepted and more benign than others. Likewise, some are more damaging and more harmful. A caffeine addiction isn't even something people notice, or that will affect your ability to function in society. Others, like heroin, well, you know. Addiction's a very real condition that can trap someone in a habit where they can be participants and witness to their own downfall. Being a participant in destroying your lifestyle, alienating loved ones, or destroying your financial and physical health. Playing as Levi, or having Levi in your party, you will have to manage his cravings and his withdrawals from heroin, which he became addicted to during the war, when he was seeing his fellow child soldiers being butchered in trenches. His addiction provided an outlet and a form of escapism for him, understandably. Addiction's a nasty disease, so if you're struggling with it, don't give up on yourself, and don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay, and it's normal to have moments when you aren't your best, and it's okay to reach out for help. Moving on, the neighbor's tongue. While Fear and Hunger 2 has lots of disgusting or off-putting monsters, for some reason, the neighbor creature always stuck in my mind. Be it the normal-looking shirt that's wearing backwards, to the large tumor-looking bludgeons that they have for hands, but most of all, the deformed face and the hyperactive tongue. Neighbors can be found in white mold apartments and the sewers primarily. Their location and name suggest that they were at one point ordinary inhabitants of the city that must have been corrupted by some otherworldly force and distorted into these weird shapes that they have now. But for some reason, it's their tongue, just whipping back and forth like it had too much caffeine, that always creeps me out. The Crimson Heads. Crimson Heads are otherworldly snails that are summoned to locations with great bloodshed, much in the same way that snails come out after it rains. Crimson Heads are able to submerge themselves in pools of blood to regenerate their physical bodies. They wield knives and are able to use mind control to compel others to continue the bloodshed. Blood for the blood god. Crimson Heads are found underneath the Church of Almer, in a dark secluded area that has recently seen a lot of bloodshed. Bloodshed that the Crimson Heads then pushed further. They were summoned to the basement underground and then used their mind control powers to make the church members and the dark priests continue the violence and turn upon each other. We find mutilated bodies cut up into pieces in the basement, showing the ritual sacrifices the Crimson Heads and the dark priests were engaged in. So the Crimson Heads are magic blood snails that like stabbing. The head juice extractor in the otherworld apartments. Getting past the washing machine puzzle in the white mold apartments, by reading the diary of a madman, we enter the otherworldly version of the apartments. Among the wooden structures and the neighbor creatures, in what would be the apartments, headless bodies can be found propped up in chairs. Tubes are coming out of their neck, and fluid is visibly flowing through them. Purpose? Unknown. In one of the rooms, we see 2 large pumps actuating, moving the extract through the tubes. As far as I know, there's no known purpose for this fluid extraction operation. It's yet another mystery of the gods in the world of Fear and Hunger. The image of a human farm and its associated extraction operation definitely makes this image stand out in the menagerie of horrors that we find in the world of Fear and Hunger. Ron Shambhara's poetry. The lost city of Mahabra will house a lot of mysteries, terrors, and lore of a world that predates and supersedes the world of humanity. Some of this ancient knowledge and wisdom that survived is some of Ranchambara's poetry, from his life as a poet before joining the Fellowship, venturing to Mahabharata, and ascending to become a new god. Ranchambara, who we talked about in my last video, was once a tortured artist and poet, quite in contrast to the appearance of the tormented soul that we see in Mahabharata during the events of the first game. And let me tell you, did you think you knew about all the horrors these games have in store for you? Well, let me introduce you to a new one, Chambara's poetry, found in the book New Poems of Love and Torment. Thanks to my wife for agreeing to help with the reading of Chambara's poetry, The Blackened Heart.
Poem 1, The Blackened Heart. Stakes are high, you are also, and more so. Live your lie, and play with my blood torso. Who would believe all your tries to blacken my name, dead crow as a prize? They say that a tear only dries. So, I want to see the day even Grogoroth cries. They will come to know this day as the cruel age. They will come to know this page as the fourth phase. Won't you die? So stupid.
Father Hugo. I find the orphanage to be one of the most unsettling and tragic portions of Fear and Hunger. The contrast of the safety and happiness that it should have brought the orphans against the sad and brutal reality of what happened here. The music is lethargic. The enemies here are more pathetic and sad rather than dangerous. The otherworld version of the orphanage features trenches similar to the ones that a lot of orphans will be recruited into the army to die in. In the back of the building, on the second floor, you'll find Father Hugo's office. 2 ritual circles will be found at the entrance, one to Grogoroth, implying blood sacrifices, and one to Sylvian, with its own implications. Father Hugo can be found standing in his office with his arms wide in embrace. He rushes to you if you get too close. The in-combat dialogue says that he's continually approaching you with his arms spread out and making the sign of the cross. An eerie figure made worse by his being a priest and wearing a frock. At some point, like a drunken friend at 3 a.m., he'll proclaim that he wants to take off his clothes. Always be careful with people that feel the need to strip down during a fight. He then sets the room on fire and continues the fight naked. He is surprisingly jacked for a priest. Maybe the orphanage diet offered a lot of protein. I just wanted to make a joke about the priest being ripped. Now I'm troubled by the implications of thinking about where they got their protein. But to be fair, I don't think the lore insinuates anything about cannibalism. Anyway, Father Hugo is disturbing. But before moving on, this video is brought to you by you. I'm making these because they're being watched, so I just wanted to take a second and say thank you. I hope you're enjoying them. Alright, number 18 on our list, the Bobbies. The Bobbies are part monster, part police, all horror. Former public servants that have been exposed to the moon scorch. Now, they patrol the main streets of Preheville looking for survivors. Their heads are moving unnaturally fast back and forth, following in the great horror tradition started in the movie Jacob's Ladder and the series Silent Hill. They have multiple arms, meaning they can deliver several attacks in quick succession. Attacking the limbs will easily dismember them, but they will grow back soon. Attacking his legs, knocking him off balance, will make his head stop twitching and become vulnerable. After the fight, inspecting a Bobby's body will show that he's still warm and pulsating. If left alone, it will regenerate and the Bobby will stand up again. Bobbies have to be beaten again to make sure they don't stand up. Between their twitching heads, abuse of authority, and general yuckiness, I definitely think the Bobbies are some of the nastier creatures we encounter. Number 19, Caligura, again, but in his moon-scorched form. I do not like Caligura. Have I mentioned that? His moon-scorched form does deserve mention for its design and its one-liners. Once moon-scorched, Caligura can be found in the sewers in his monster form. He is obscene, constantly yelling out to gargle his balls, and his attack is primarily by spewing toxic poison at the party. His design is inspired by, well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? So all in all, encountering him in his monster form is definitely an affront on the senses. Caligura is one of the characters in the game that is inspired by a real historical person. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to see how Caligura stands up to Caligula. And oddly, I'm not sure the in-game Caligura is the worst of the two. So here are some highlights from the Wikipedia article on the Roman Emperor Caligula. Disclosure, some of these are believed to be contemporaneous propaganda of the time. But hey, it makes for good stories. And if you like sex and violence, I highly recommend checking out Roman history. It is wild. Quote, they described him as an insane emperor who was self-absorbed and short-tempered, who killed on a whim and indulged in too much spending and sex. He is accused of sleeping with other men's wives and bragging about it, killing for mere amusement, deliberately wasting money, causing starvation, and once, at some games at which he was presiding, he was said to have ordered his guards to throw an entire section of the audience into the arena during intermission to be eaten by wild beasts because there were no prisoners to be used and he was bored. Caligula was also accused of incest with his sisters, and it was said that he prostituted them to other men. Additionally, there are mentions of various affairs he had with other men, including his brother-in-law, Marcus Lepidus. They say that he sent troops on illogical military exercises, turned a palace into a brothel, and, most famously, made his horse his consul and appointed a priest to serve him. And last on our list for today, the Sojobs. Sojobs are constructed monsters made from different body parts, sewn together and brought to life by unnatural means. Found descending from above in different parts of the city. We find out their origins while visiting Bunker 1, where we find Stiches and her other unnatural experiments with the human form and body parts. I think it can be argued that the Sojobs' appearance may draw a little bit of inspiration from Mary Shelley's description of the Frankenstein monster, being composed of different discarded body parts that were sewn together after death and then reanimated to create a creature that doesn't conform with the natural order. It's been a long time since I've read it. I do recommend reading Frankenstein. It is a scary but sometimes heartfelt story, and is considered to be the first sci-fi novel ever written. Anyways, while the Sojob is creepy and unsettling, at least they are fortunately some of the least deadly monsters that you will encounter in Prehevel and have fairly low HP. They're fairly easy to deal with.
And that's all for my list today. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, have a good one, and later.
Hi, hello, welcome. Thank you very much for clicking on the thumbnail and checking out my video. Like several of my other recent videos, this will be a list of 20 nasty things in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina. No point in wasting time, let's get to it. Number 1, the Centaur. Let's start off the list with this enraging and also off-putting centaur. I'm not gonna verbally describe what type of amalgamation this monster looks like, but one look at the design, which looks like an inversed centaur, I think it's pretty evident what this monster design is alluding to. The centaur will be found on the way to Bunker 1, in the deep woods where you activate one of the 3 teletroscope stations. You'll be running back and forth in a lightly forested area before the entrance of the bunker. To the unprepared party, the centaur is a formidable challenge that needs to be overcome if fought. Fortunately, evasion is an option. The centaur will use a stampede attack if all 4 of its legs are healthy. The stampede attack deals a lot of damage and hits the entire party, being able to wipe it out in 2 or 3 attacks. Fortunately, most of your party should have enough agility to get 1 attack in before the centaur's stampede attack. So, if the party is able to deal enough damage to one of its legs, it will stop the stampede attacks, and the centaur will be forced to switch to other attacks that only hit 1 party member at a time. So, if you are able to disable one of its legs on the first turn before he is able to do a stampede attack, your odds for surviving the encounter will increase greatly. And The rest of the encounter might just be trivial from here on in. Fortunately, there's only one centaur roaming the Preheville area. If you deal with this monstrosity, you won't have to revisit him again on the same playthrough. Due to his damage output and the unnerving monster design, the centaur well deserves its place at the top of any list of nasty things. Number 2. The Bell End. Encountering the Bell End means that you're entering the endgame. In normal difficulty, the Bell End is only encountered after entering Mausoleum Alley, after going through the secret passage in the Church of Ulmer. They are a resilient threat in the last third of the game. Fortunately, they're not too hard to avoid. The Bell End's monster design is similar to the Mumbler, in terms of where it draws visual inspiration from. Armed with a spear, and is able to harden itself to negate most damage. They are a real nuisance when approaching the museum or the tower. Combat against the Bell End usually devolves into a throbbing grind, as the Bell End's hardened ability will negate a lot of the incoming damage. We don't get too much lore or backstory to the Bell End, but from the combat dialogue, the only thing we can derive is that they are territorial and might hesitate in attacking you if you recognize that you've trespassed onto its territory. Dan's medical ability tells us that the Bell End has the sturdy shell-like exoskeleton. The skin or the surface layers feel like hardened leather that has been burned to a crisp. And for these reasons, the Bell End is one of the nastier encounters you'll have in the second half of your journey in Preheville. Number 3. The Ratkin Gang. A form of evolved rat found in the sewers and in greater numbers further underneath the city. Entering the Foundations of Decay, you'll notice one of the ratkin further down the tunnel. If you approach it, it will run away, wait for you to approach again, and then repeat. If you follow him all the way to the end, you'll end up in this little nook of the cave system with 2 treasure chests. Shortly thereafter, you'll realize this is a trap, as a pack of the ratkin box you in. Some armed with weapons, some just using their natural claws. The ratkin spring a planned out ambush on you. With their numbers, weapons, ferocity, they do present a serious threat as a group. This encounter is a great opportunity to use things like gas canisters or any spells that have AoE and can hit all members of the opposing party. After a tough fight, the player will be able to loot the chest and collect any treasures from the ratkin. Also, if you're so inclined, you can start collecting trophies here if you have the bone saw. Number 4. The Heartless One. The Heartless One is an extremely challenging optional boss that can be fought for some endgame gear. Summoned from the imperfect circle using the heart-shaped lock. The Heartless One is a new god that we learn about in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina for the first time. To summon the Heartless One, the player will have to enter the Church of Ulmer through the Foundations of Decay. Crashing the chandelier down will prevent the player from getting the rustic key, which is needed to encounter the Heartless One. Taking the key to Rare's Otherworld, near where we encountered its Morphia in the church, we will find someone completely covered in chains, almost as if this person was locked up and chained for a good reason. No one ends up in this position accidentally. Somebody's trying to keep the Heartless One contained and trapped. Nevertheless, we can use the rusty key to free the goddess. Doing so will allow her to be summoned from an imperfect ritual circle. Once summoned, she challenges the player to a one-on-one duel that they cannot turn down. The Heartless One will appear as a woman with white hair and an imposing appearance and presentation, kinda resembling some of the character art from Signalis. In one hand, holding the Red Virtue, an extremely light sword that allows the user attack much quicker, and she is holding a large spear in the other hand. It is said that the Red Virtue is one of the 2 swords forged for the ancient king of Mahabre. The duel with the Heartless One is a brutal and unrelenting battle, to the point that it is difficult to even survive her opening attack. Overcoming the Heartless One will require specific accessories and skills to be able to mitigate and counter her attacks, along with the best gear in the game. She is a brutal and overwhelming opponent. It's not hard to see why somebody felt the need to keep her contained. According to the wiki, the name and design of the Heartless One are a homage to a Fear and Hunger 2 content creator, community member, Heartless Angel Ketsueki. Something that Dark Souls taught me is that sometimes a story is best enjoyed when you figure it out yourself. I think our brains tend to have a deeper understanding of an idea, story, or concept if we are able to understand it in pieces and then put it together as a whole rather than just getting an overview. Good environmental storytelling allows you to take pieces of a story that you've picked up through exploration and then put it all together in your head. When I was doing an Olivia run for this video, I ran through the sewers that I had run through so many times before, probably dozens of times by now, when something stood out to me I had never noticed before. Past the water treatment puzzle, approaching the Preheville Bop and the West Preheville sewer hose, you might have noticed this area where there is a large concentration of ghouls, but unlike the ghouls on the surface, these are just sitting, resting, and holding blankets around their shoulders, rather than their surface counterparts that are actively walking around and patrolling an area, like in the slums. So my question is why? Why are these ghouls seemingly resting while the ones topside were active and prowling? Also, unlike other ghouls that tend to be solitary, these ghouls are sitting in a group. So here's my current theory, and let me know what you think in the comments. I could be way off here. Could this have been a group of survivors that were seeking shelter that fell to the effects of moon scorching? From playing masochism mode, and from what the moon scorched villagers tell us, we know that moon scorching requires direct exposure to Rare's light. But is it possible the green hue could have the same effect? Could people have been exposed to moon scorching and while still having some of their faculties and logic, made their way down to the sewers seeking safety and shelter? Maybe they were a group that were exposed to the green hue or maybe contaminated water? It makes sense to me that given the invasion by the Bremen army and then the chaos of the festival, that some people would have sought to escape by going underground. I don't know, but when observing the ghouls grouped up in the sewers, holding blankets around themselves, almost comforting themselves, it's hard not to remember they were just villagers at some point, whose lives were destroyed due to the whims of the gods. It's hard not to stare at them for a second and feel some sympathy for them. I mean, we've all had moments when we do the same, wrap something cozy around ourselves and just take a moment and a breather, collect yourself, especially in such a chaotic and turbulent world. Well, having said that, it's time to break out the bone saw and start harvesting some trophies. These heads aren't going to get to the tainted one by themselves, and nobody wants to let soul stones go to waste. Number 6, the White Mode Apartment Serial Killer. When I say that something in a game is inspired or similar to something in an older game, my goal is not to discredit anything. So by mentioning that something in Fear and Hunger is inspired by Silent Hill, I'm not trying to cheapen the work Orange has done, but rather point out that these are Easter eggs for players that may have grown up playing the same games that Miro did, such as Silent Hill. If I made a game, it'd be filled with references and homages in much the same way. So continuing Fear and Hunger's tradition of honoring older games that have laid out the foundation upon which newer games will continue from, for number 6 we have another Silent Hill reference in Fear and Hunger, and that is the White Mode Apartment Serial Killer. Exploring Central Preheville, the player will eventually encounter the goddamn fecal dogs, I hate them in particular, and enter this non-assuming apartment building, only to find out that the door has locked behind you. The apartment building is large, quiet, and still. You get a chance to explore the basement, where parts and supplies are kept, and then each individual apartment, each having its own distinct theme or personality. The boxed up room of a new tenant, the instruments of a music-loving lady, the tenant with a puppet collection that's not creepy at all, and the one that apparently loved astronomy and telescopes, or was simply a creeper. We eventually learned the story of the serial killer in the building that had targeted the inhabitants for an ancient, forbidden ritual that he would carry out, but he needed sacrifices. The story of the White Mode Apartment serial killer has a few similarities to the story of Walter Sullivan in Silent Hill 4. In Silent Hill 4, Walter tries to complete an ancient and forbidden ritual that requires human sacrifices. So he starts hunting down the inhabitants of the apartment building and sacrificing them for a ritual called the 21 Sacraments. The protagonist of Silent Hill 4 much like the party in the white mold apartments. Eventually learns that he is trapped in the apartment building and can't get out, just like how the doors lock behind you when you enter the apartment building in Gungar Fungar 2 Termina. I just thought that was really cool. I'm a big fan of the good Silent Hill games. Moving on, number 7, the Foundations of Decay. One of the areas that most fascinates me in Preheville is the Foundations of Decay. Found after solving the water treatment puzzle, the Foundations of Decay are somewhere underneath the old train station in Preheville. This mysterious location gives us more questions than answers as we explore it. Upon first descending, what stands out most is the blue hue of the caves, along with the expansive herb and mushroom variety growing down here. Like I hinted before, this also seems to partially be the realm of the Ratkin. Exploring further, we find these pile of corpses that seem to be organized into a pile around some sort of monument or statue. No idea what the purpose is of this, or how these bodies got here. Was this grisly display here before the festival, or a more recent addition? Also, if you have any information on what the structure might be, let me know in the comments, I'm kind of curious. Down here, we also encounter an old friend. This is where Moonless lives now. I wonder if her presence here means that Preheville was built on top of the cave system that the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger tapped into. Past where we encounter Moonless, we'll find a crypt filled with skulls, and it reminds me a lot of some of the themes and visual design of Blasphemous, which I had the pleasure of playing through recently, specifically Melquiades and the Ossuary, where the bones are collected. At the far end of the tunnel system, we'll find an elevator leading back up to the surface near the slums, but also connecting to the Church of Almer. Presumably, it was used by the Dark Priest to move around, access the slums, and the people that live there. Eidos is one of the most iconic enemies in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina. Most players will run into him for the first time in the nearest bunker to the train, where Eidos makes one hell of a first impression by decapitating Tanaka and stealing his hat. As long as the player hasn't defeated him in battle, Eidos will stalk the player throughout Preheville with his evil laughter echoing down the empty cobblestone streets of Preheville, all the while grinning and looking like he's having a fun time behind his twisted white and blue clown grin. In combat, he proves to be a challenge to all but a well-equipped party. He has high HP and is able to inflict a good bit of damage with his needle whip and poison the player with the syringe he's holding in his other hand. If his arms are damaged enough, he'll stop with the pleasantries and whip out a pistol that he'll use for the rest of the fight. That I know of, other than the Weeping Scope, he is the only monster encountered in Preheville that uses a firearm. Well, I guess you could include the Platoon in that, depending on what you would call a firearm. In the lore, it's suggested that Eidos is or has some connection to Baron Einher von Dutch from Dan's backstory. Before being drafted into the war, Dan was studying medicine under the Baron and was engaged to his daughter Elise. When the Great War broke out, Dan was drafted to the army to serve on the front lines. While he was gone, the Baron's interest in the occult deepened. Once released from his military service with the army, he returned home to find the most tragic scene that had played out. His beloved Elise and her father Baron Einher von Dutch had perished in the middle of a ritual to an old god. While playing as Dan, he'll mention that Eidos looks like his father-in-law if you inspect the body with the medical diagnosis skill, and Eidos will scowl at Dan in combat. Though there's another member of the Von Dutch family that is believed to be alive in some form in Preheville. Also, Eidos has a hat. Number 9, Stiches. Most players will make it to the Teletroscope station in the deep forest last, right when they are starting to unravel the mystery of what is really under Preheville. Here, they will run into Stiches, a character similar in theme to Eidos. Stiches has a similar scarred and pale appearance to Eidos. She is found underground, surrounded by monstrosities that it's believed she created. The lump of flesh, the human caterpillar, and a sew job found next to a bone saw and dismembered limbs. Inspecting her body with Dan's medical skill gives us this sad realization. She eerily reminds you of somebody. The more you entertain the idea, the more certain you become of this haunting realization. no matter how disfigured her face would be, you would always recognize your wife Elise. This woman has her appearance. You are 100% certain of it now, but it's impossible. She's dead. This place has gotten the best of you. Or maybe there is some other sinister reasoning behind all this. You hope that it is only your mind that is crumbling here. You wish Elise has her rest now. We don't know for sure what dark power reanimated Elise and her father, but let's hope they find their rest, and that Dan can find some peace after the events of the Festival of Termina. Number 10. Cutting off heads to get skills. An interesting sleight of hand that Fear and Hunger 2 does is regarding skill and progression. The game doesn't have a traditional level nor experience system, so at a glance, it appears that progression is done through gear, kind of like in the Monster Hunter games. But as you get familiar with the game, and as veterans will quickly figure out, you'll notice the presence of soul stones and the hexen tables. Getting even more familiar with the world of Termina, you'll learn that soul stones can be crafted by presenting offerings to the Tainted One. Offerings being heads that you've cut off with the bone saw. This is a very interesting mechanic in the game. Since there is a much expanded skill system, there is a strong incentive to make sure you have enough soul stones to get everything you need for the endgame. But what do you do if you don't have enough soul stones that you found through exploration? Herein lies the trick. The motivation to collect heads will change how you view Preheville and the game. All of a sudden, the moon-scorched villagers in the slums, the group of ghouls in the sewers, the bodies in East Preheville, the ratkin in the Foundations of Decay, all have a new shine, a new glamour. Leaving the bodies there, it's just soul stones going to waste. So the game presents you with a moral question. Are you willing to go around the city collecting heads for more skills and power? Be careful when you stare into the abyss, for the abyss will stare back. You can have a character that one day prior was a regular civilian with no predisposition to violence, and then the next day, a jaded head collector with a bag full of trophies to offer up to the Tainted One for more power. Also, another fun note on how Fear and Hunger pushes you to do things you wouldn't do in other games. If a party member dies in combat, you don't get the soul, nor can you collect the head to trade with Pocket Cat. So if you want to get someone's skills, the game makes you be the aggressor. The game wants you to get your hands dirty if you want it to be easier. Now, you don't have to, but the game would be easier if you turn on the other participants and then just became a butcher that roamed the city of Preheville collecting heads. I thought it was clever and insidious how Fear and Hunger 2 will incentivize you to do things you wouldn't have thought to do in a game, and how the game forces you to do nasty stuff to make the game easier. Alright, and moving on to number 11, continuing a similar theme, we have getting access to the tower. If you're going for ending A, you can beat the game without ever using violence against any other participants of the festival. But that changes if you're going for ending B. So say you start a new game, and you already know what skills you want for that given run. You can then proceed to hunt down every other participant like a cold-blooded killer at the very start of the game. I think it's a very interesting and powerful narrative tool to immerse the player in the dark world of the festival. And this is something I really thought was interesting for ending B, where you confront Rare in the tower. The easiest way to get end game gear is to have a party to make the early and mid game easier, meaning that if you're going to try to fight Rare, you might squad up in the first parts of the game, but that means approaching the end game, you'll have to kill everybody else in your party, or find a way for them to accidentally meet their end, such as unequipping all their armor and forgetting to heal them. But even after dealing with the deaths of everybody in your party, you will inevitably hunt down the other participants. So if you're trying to save yourself, you will eventually end up with a lot of blood on your hands. And this stands in stark contrast to ending A, where your character sacrifices themselves entering the White Bunker and not surviving the events of the game, but all the remaining characters will survive. So it's an interesting contrast between both endings. In one ending, you doom everybody else but save yourself while having tons of blood on your hands. And the other, where you fight the machine god, where you try to do the right thing, sacrificing yourself so that others may live. I'm sure there's some deep moral or philosophical statement here, but I don't know what it is. It just stood out to me that there's such a difference thematically between both endings. Do you survive at the cost of the lives of everybody else? Or do you become the sacrificial hero and go into the white bunker so that the others might escape Preheville? Number 12, accessibility and disability. Something I've mentioned before that I liked about Fear and Hunger is in its portrayal of character types that don't always get represented in different forms of media. A child soldier, an addict, a trans woman, and to a lesser degree, some of the other characters, which include a mystic from a foreign land, a doctor, an engineer, and a disabled botanist. Games, movies, books can be great vehicles to create empathy or to present a different life experience to the viewer or the player by giving you an inside view to the life experience of a different person. Something that gave me an experience like that was playing as the botanist, Olivia. She was one of the later characters I played as, meaning that my first runs through Preheville were all with able-bodied characters. During these first run-throughs, at no point did I ever ask myself, how would Olivia, who is bound to a wheelchair, navigate this terrain and urban landscape? It hadn't impacted me, so I didn't think about it, as tends to happen. The first time I played with Olivia, I got a glimpse of what a disability such as hers would be like. Small things that I didn't even consider became big obstacles when playing as Olivia. Routine actions now involved conscious effort and planning. Now, you have to be sure to hit C to be able to climb up the stairs, or face being stuck. Do I give my best weapon to Olivia, since she can be tackled and knocked out for a round, or do I give it to a different character that doesn't have that vulnerability? Playing as Olivia, I realized just how many staircases there are in this urban environment, how nothing here was built with her disabilities in mind, which kind of makes sense historically given the setting. If you can't climb stairs, well, sorry for you, which sucks because outside of the slums, I think most of the apartments and dwellings are not at surface level. In different ways, we will all have challenges or disabilities, shortcomings, handicaps that others don't. Mountains or stairways that we have to overcome that others may not see. The same way that I never registered most of the stairs in the game until I had to dismount from the wheelchair to navigate them. When I was younger, I had a really bad stutter. That put me in a situation where I knew what I wanted to say, but was unable to do so, which sometimes caused people to laugh. I used to wonder why did I have to deal with this when no one else around me did. So I just wanted to take this moment and reflect on how cool it is that Fear and Hunger 2 attempts to give you a little bit of a perspective on the trials and tribulations some other people around us might go through that we don't see, by including a character that faces mobility challenges. And like I said, we all have our challenges. They may not be the same or even comparable, but a mountain is always a challenge to the person that has to climb it. And we could all learn to have more empathy and consideration as we navigate the landscapes that we find ourselves in. This adult shit ain't easy. So just remember you're not alone if you feel tired or exasperated, just trying to make the day today. I don't know if that helps, but I hope it does. So yeah, next on our list. Number 13, being moonscorched. Being moonscorched means being exposed to the code green radiation of rare, which perverts and twists any human life exposed to it. Rare's green code radiation stands in contrast to the sun's yellow heat. For radiation to be code doesn't even make sense in physics. It would mean that this is a form of electromagnetic radiation that extracts energy or heat from whatever it comes in contact with. I think this only amplifies the corrupting and otherworldly effect of the Trickster Moon Rare. In normal difficulties, we will only see the effects of moonscorching after the fact. To see the effects of moonscorching, the player will have to do one of two things. Wait until the third night of the festival, which can be accomplished by taking the slacker route to the festival and just sleeping through the entire thing, or by exposing yourself directly to the effects of moonscorching in masochism mode, where you can only withstand a limited time of exposure to the moon before being corrupted and transforming into your moonscorched form. And if you want to see what the character's moonscorched form is, you can check out my other video on the City of Fear and Hunger. Number 14, Pocket Cat's Room. If the player is able to get affinity to rare increased 3 times, the Golden Gate skill is unlocked. The Golden Gates are another form of fast travel, connecting the otherworldly locations found throughout the journey. But in this mysterious golden hallway, there are deeper mysteries still. If the player investigates the pitch black walls, they will find that one section of the wall opens into another room. Inside this room, the player will encounter the mysterious stranger who doesn't communicate much and is chewing something. His face appears bandaged and his head deformed. Passing up the stranger, we can enter another room. This is Pocket Cat's secret room. Examining the items here, we will see a collection of toys, including the peculiar doll the little girl had, a jack-in-a-box that seems to reference Perkele, a Tin Man, and a baby Blight doll. But something disturbing lays behind the toys. Here, we can see where Pocket Cat would bring the poor little victims of his hunting. Bags leaking of blood can be seen alongside the toys. We don't have a way to be sure what's inside of them, but circumstantial evidence is enough. The Decrepit Priest. Something I noticed when I was replaying through Fear and Hunger Termina recently is how loathsome the Decrepit Priests really are. I've already gone over the orphanage and everything that happened there, so instead I'd like to focus on the other nasty characteristics of these priests. That creepy smile of theirs. The Decrepit Priests have easily the most punchable smile in all of Perhevel. No, all of Bohemia. If not the most punchable faces in all of Eastern Europa, I dare say. It's almost as if their evilness and the essence of Grogoroth had infected and permeated their smile to make it as unsettling as possible. And their creepy smile is in addition to their Hellraiser-like crisscross skin, which just gives me goosebumps thinking about. And if all that wasn't bad enough, take a look at the Decrepit Priest after death animation, which triggered for me when I failed a coin toss and was done in by the choke attack. A scene where the player is ritually sacrificed plays out, with seemingly deranged and bloodthirsty villagers dancing around the crucifixion, which removed any doubt about the dark arts still being practiced by the priest at the Church of Almer. For being able to creep out and make a Fear Hunger veteran think, why am I playing this game? I think the Decrepit Priests deserve a place on this list. The Crow Chimera in the White Bunker. Similarly to some of Stiches' experiments and handiwork that we saw in Bunker 1, in the White Bunker, we see the human Crow Chimera. We don't know much about it. Maybe it's a throwback to the Crow Mauler that I know of. There's nothing in the lore, notes, books, or dialogues that would give us insight into its history or purpose. Maybe the memory of what became of Captain Rudimer survived through the ages, perhaps in some book or through Legard's memory. Is it possible that somebody in the Bremen army, under the command and direction of Legard, was trying to replicate or revive the Crow Mauler? The site of the White Bunker might be pretty close to where the original dungeon of Fear and Hunger was. Could they have found what remained of the body of Captain Rudimer? Maybe as a plan B to use against the old gods? Or maybe as a bodyguard and protector for Rayla to keep those pesky intruders out? Either way, it will remain a mystery for now, and the Crow Chimera will remain the office mascot of the White Bunker. The Commander and Platoon. In the bottom of the White Bunker, having crossed both of the impressive and colossal chasms, we reach the bottom. Here begins the final 3-boss gauntlet you'll have to endure and overcome in order to get ending A, and the Red Arc skill that's become one of my favorites. The first boss in this gauntlet is the duel of the Commander, also known as the Sylvian Trooper, and Platoon. We first catch sight of them when we see the leather-clad Commander. You can tell she honestly enjoys her job. Nobody dresses in leather like that, unless they like it. You could say that she's very obvious about her devotion to Sylvian. Approaching her, she merrily skitters away. A moment later, something large can be first felt and then heard approaching the darkness. Then we see the Platoon. Similar in design to the human Hydra, we can assume that the Platoon is the result of a massive Sylvian ritual where dozens, if not hundreds, were fused together. The resulting human Hydra was then armed with new military technology to give it some extra punch. The resulting human tank was then placed under the order and control of a fanatical Bremen officer, the Commander. The devoted, leather-clad believer in the Kaiser enjoys the thrill of battle. If you tell her the war is over, you learn that this isn't just a duty to her, but a labor of love. Engaging them in combat, the biggest threat will be the cannon on the platoon, which can one-shot anybody in your party. Fortunately, the commander and platoon function as a duo, operating in unison. Therefore, removing the weakest link cripples their combat capabilities. Taking out the commander will mean removing the cannon on the platoon from the equation, since the platoon will only fire when ordered by the commander. With the commander out of the picture, the party will have to withstand the platoon's much easier to manage melee attacks. Whittling away at the platoon, it can be put down easily enough, searching the body of the commander after the fight. You get the important little detail that the Sylvian trooper doesn't exactly have any crevices where to hide anything. I can't imagine that outfit is comfortable. With the Kaiser's bodyguards out of the picture, the party may then continue to the second of 3 threats. Moving on, the rematch with the King in Yellow. A throwback to one of the endings of the first game, we have the encounter with the Kaiser of the Bremen army himself, the leader of a fierce military that led the invasion of Prehevil and triggered the start of the Great War that burned across Europa. The ascended new god, Legard, captain of the Knights of the Midnight Sun. Meeting this bastard baby is far more entertaining if you have Nasra in your possession, as they will revisit their old debate from part 1. Here, we hear about Legard's machinations to turn a repeating cycle into a spiral that one day would push humanity further and further from the grasp of the old gods and the old world. Legard hopes to build a new world out of the control of the primordial forces of reality, through having humanity merge with the machine god. Legard has found a way to create a universal concept that can be shared by all mankind, which would result in the birth of a new god. The fight with Legard rings with echoes of part 1. Again, he is accompanied by an asterisk and the snake, which will cast healing whispers on the King in Yellow. Legard can also use his leg sweep ability from when he was in the dungeon in the Kingdom of Rondon. After defeating the King in Yellow, Nasra seems frustrated, as if Legard's plans would succeed regardless. He then says to go smash the machine god at least, to try to piss on his plans. Number 19. The Machine God. The party enters the White Womb of Logic, the room where awakening a god and fusing it with Rayla should have given rise to a science-driven god that could wrestle control of reality away from the old primordial gods. The Machine God, or the Logic, represents Legard's plan to try to create a new virtual reality built on science and engineering. A red crystallid stands on top of a spiked engine with attached exhaust ports. The Machine God stands imposingly and towering over the party, a new concept of what humanity could become once we fuse with our machines and devices, enveloping humanity with data and algorithms, boosting engagement in this new virtual world where all data and all connections are instantaneous. The music is ominous and threatening, sometimes playing the old melody of Mahabharata, the only other location that we know of that has seen the ascension of humans to godhood. After some time, the machine god will evolve into what would be its final form. We see the body of Rayla fully integrated into the Logic, with no clear division of where machine starts and humanity ends. A portrait of a future for humanity with no chaos and only machine-maintained order, one hand representing creation and one hand representing destruction. Artificial replacements for the primordial forces that have ruled over humanity since the beginning of time. At the end of the encounter, the Logic will open itself up, revealing a green hue, absorbing the party into itself, bringing the reality into its new artificial reality. A new fake truth where all of humanity is restrained but connected, surrounded by an artificial green hue. And last on our list for today, Abella's weapons. As I'm sure you've seen throughout this video and in my previous video on nasty things in Termina, you might have noticed I started using a lot of Abella's crafted weapons. They are powerful and some accessible from the early game. They have high damage output and will also inflict status effects, such as bleed, poison, and fire. But king among the weapons that Abella can craft is the Meat Grinder, a modified buzzsaw, customized to make it portable and easy to wield. It has high damage output, can inflict bleed, and hits 3 times per turn. So if your ability is above 15, that means 6 attacks per turn. The challenge though is getting the Meat Grinder. First, you'll need the weapons craft skill, which Abella can start with. Most of the components are pretty easy to find. The challenge will be getting the bench grinder. There are only 3 available in the game. 1 in the bunker in the deep woods, 1 can be found after defeating the mob, and 1 can be stolen from Abella in combat. If the player can get 1 or 2 meat grinders, and couple them with the Small Things amulet, the party will be nearly unstoppable and will be able to take out most monsters in a turn or 2. After dying so many times to the horrors in Preheville, it's fun to turn the odds on them. It makes exploration a lot easier, since now you can break down nearly all the doors in the game. And with that, we've reached the end of today's video. I'd like to sincerely thank you for watching. Take care of yourself and be as well as you can be. Later. Hi, hello, and welcome. Thank you very much for checking out my corner of the information superhighway by clicking on my YouTube entertainment video. Today we'll be talking about 20 even more nasty things in Fear and Hunger 1 and 2, or another way to think about it, here's a list of 20 things in these games I just wanted to talk about. You guys know the drill, so let's just hop right in. But before, if I could bother you for one favor, just hit that like button right beneath the screen. That'd be great and a lot of help. So let's get started with number 1. The Sad Zombie. In one of the earlier levels of the dungeon of Fear and Hunger, a lone zombie will be found wandering the hallways of a prison, dragging himself without legs, which we can assume were cut off by the nearby prison guards. This zombie can be an annoyance or deadly if he manages to scratch and infect you, especially if you don't have any cloth fragments or green herbs, since this could mean an early and frustrating end to your run. But did you know there's a safe, easier, and more depressing way of dealing with this undead zombie? You see, although the zombie is dead, he can still feel, and he is feeling sad. A sad zombie. When you use the talk skill with him, you can try to be menacing and threaten him, which prompts a surprising response when you tell the zombie to prepare to die, even though he's already dead. In response, the undead prisoner will tell you that he wants to die, and then proceeds to stay still so you can do what you're going to do. He's hoping for you to end his misery. Learning this does lend a different context to the zombie, since it will make you start seeing him less of a menace and more like another victim of the dungeon. But talking to him and threatening him does make him easier to deal with, just by using this one simple trick. Zombies hate this one trick, but it is a sad and nasty little situation that this undead finds himself in. So remember, when it comes to zombies, use words when swords can't get the job done, but only if the zombie is sad. Number 2. Fighting the Tormented One in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina. Ronnie the Tormented One is indeed one of the standout characters of Fear and Hunger, but did you know you can also encounter him in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina? If you pick up the dead crow in the center of Preheville, next to the sewer hole, and then take it to your local imperfect ritual circle, you'll get the option to offer the dead crow up to the new gods. If you do so, Ronnie Ron will then arise out of the ritual circle, materializing out of a pool of blood, and then start walking towards you in absolute silence. The fight with the Tormented One is a lot like the first phase of the fight in Fear and Hunger 1, with the only big change being that he will sprout chain vines from his shoulders that are able to cast the Chains of Torment spell. This fight isn't the hardest in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina by a stretch. I'd say it's substantially easier than the fight against the Heartless One, especially since you don't have to fight Ronnie's second phase in the Wheels of Torment. Once the Tormented One is defeated, Ronnie's trademark skill will be unlocked,
the Chains of Torment. While powerful, it does take up a lot of mind to cast, but it is cool to be able to use Ranni's iconic spell and pretend that you're the tormented one. But ultimately, there are other more cost-efficient spells like Black Smog, Hurting, or Roots That Bind. Number 3. Chambara's Poetry Revisited. Who is a better poet, ChatGPT or Ron Chambara, the Tormented One? Revisiting the topic of Chambara's poetry, I wanted to do a quick experiment. Let's read one of Ronnie's poems, and then let's read one made by ChatGPT, and see, according to you, the audience, which one is a superior poet. I would have tried to write my own poetry, but I don't want to give away the fact that I am horrible at it and I know nothing about poetry. So here we go, a poem made by ChatGPT about an awful poet called Ronnie. In a village quaint where shadows play, lived Ronnie the poet with words of clay. His quill would scribble, his parchment weep, for Ronnie's verses put listeners to sleep. He'd rhyme moon with spoon and night with light, each stanza a jumble, an awkward plight. Villagers cringed at his clumsy prose, as Ronnie's poetry wilted like a dying rose. Yet undeterred, with heart so bold, Ronnie persisted, his tales retold. Though his art was flawed, his spirit shone bright, a medieval jester in verse and in plight. And for contrast, here is one of the poems we can find in-game, written by Ron Chambara. Silent grace in life hid your eye. In eyes I used to dream all night, wasted tears weighing my back, for our love of lies, lies. I used to wake all nights, chains in my heart, gaining weight before your eyes. Too heavy for me to bear, can't you see me suffer? So hard to withstand, even a sight of your eyes. Chains in my heart so heavy, I can't defy. So let me know what you think about the comments. ChatGPT or Ron Chambara as the superior poet. Number 4, and next on our list, pipe bombs. Nasty little improvised weapons. You know what people like? Explosions. Especially if someone's walking away from the explosion in slow motion and not looking back. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Pipe bombs were added to the franchise in Part 2, Termina. To get them, you'll have to flush the turd that is Caligura, and then unlock his explosive skill. Gather up the crafting materials, and you'll have a consumable item that deals about 500 points of damage with a variance of 20% to anything on the field, making them useful and powerful, especially in the early to mid game. Since crafting materials are limited, using pipe bombs is usually reserved for those special occasions when some shit needs to be blown up. Just for the lows, and to see what would happen, I did do a full run of Termina using mostly just pipe bombs. I had to edit the save game to give myself all of them. Doing this makes the early game a breeze, since you'll be able to one-shot almost everything. Where the pipe bombs do start to lose effectiveness is later on in the game, when you would otherwise be using the Red Virtue, Meat Grinder, or any other high damage item. Towards the endgame specifically, if you have the Leechmonger Ring, the Yangetsu Amulet, or the ability to inflict burning, poison, or bleeding, the pipe bombs will start to lose their shine, and it will become a challenge to output enough damage to beat the endgame bosses, since the pipe bombs are limited to doing at most about 500 points of damage to any one part of the enemy, where with some luck with the Meat Grinder or the Red Virtue you can get into the thousands of damage points. Though, the pipe bombs are useful for dealing with the exhaust ports during the fight with the Machine God, and it is just fun to run around lobbing explosives at everything. Number 5, Ending C. Ending C in Fear Hunger 2 Termina is achieved if the player is able to eliminate all other contestants before day 3, and then you make it to the tower. Instead of fighting both the Traces of Rare and the goddamned asshole, the evil spirit feathered Moon Simp Man, since you only have to fight Perkele, and he can be one-shotted, more on that later on in the video. This might be the easiest of the 3 endings possible in Fear Hunger Termina. Once Bird Boy is defeated, you'll get a special cutscene that will make you super conscious of how fast and how far you can whip your tongue left and right. In the lore of Fear and Hunger, the Sulphur God was created when the Ascended One, Ulmer, ascended, and the Sulphur God descended. Damn, I could have written that better. Anyways, when Ulmer ascends to godhood, all of his dark, hate-filled parts separated from him and descended. This shard of Ulmer became its own entity known as the Sulphur God that awaits in the pits of hell. In the world of humans, the cult of the Sulphur God is at least in part led by Perkele, who orchestrated the Festival of Termina in order to get more followers and sacrifices to the Sulphur God. And I'm hoping that in later releases or content additions, we'll find out more about the Sulphur God and any schemes he might be up to. Also, in real life, sulfur smells like poop. Ending D, a new god, Fear Hunger 1. If you were to ask the humanity-hating trickster moon god, what is something that humanity should never do? He'd answer that humanity should never have the audacity of trying to ascend to godhood. Rare sees humanity as a lesser form of existence and doesn't believe that the halls of gods should ever be sullied with the presence of humans. But nevertheless, throughout the eras, we will encounter a long list of people that have had such audacity or daring, reaching for the throne of the gods to take possession of it for themselves. Like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods so that humanity might one day burn themselves when they microwave a frozen meal for too long. In Ending D, for the first game, we get a glimpse of what would happen if one of the playable characters sat on the golden throne and ascended to godhood. Waking up in the green hue of the void, the player will start to explore this weird alien landscape. Each player will encounter an ascended version of themselves, their god self, or perhaps a perverted version of themselves, depending on your interpretation of events. The player character will have a back and forth with their deity form, asking about how you would rule and influence the path humanity will take over the next few centuries, as you invisibly guide the road humanity takes as a new god. You will get a message saying that the player never escaped the dungeon and rather remained in the void as a new god. But in the end, we learn that the very concept of the new gods is just another scheme for control perpetuated by the old gods. Number 7. Rot. There are many powerful spells in Fear and Hunger, but there is only one that will cause the battle sprite to change, visibly rotting the afflicted. And this spell also reveals the true nature of the Kaiser and how he survived the events of Fear and Hunger 1, and that spell is Rot. The Rot spell is unlocked from the God of Fear and Hunger skill tree, requiring 1 level of affinity. Casting it will cost 1 rev point and 20 mind. The Rot spell has the negligible effect of inflicting 5 damage points randomly, and the non-negligible effect of lowering the HP of all enemy torsos, making it a valuable spell for anyone that can deal any amount of melee damage. Where I think that Rot really shines is if you couple it with the Spice Forge skill. If you set the first effect to Rot, it will auto-cast before every fight, meaning that as the fight starts, all the enemies will have weakened torsos. Couple that with high agility, the meditation skill, and the meat grinder or red virtue, it will mean you are able to deal multiple high damage attacks on weakened enemy torsos, allowing you to take out a lot of the tougher enemies in the game in just 1 turn. Number 8. The Ruin spell casted by the Spectre Ghost in the mines in Fear and Hunger 1. I think that the specters or ghosts in the mines are some of the more original ideas in the first game that got dropped in the second game. The specters are enemies that will materialize or appear once the player approaches. If you go into battle with them, you'll learn that since they are ghosts, they can only be hurt with magic or cursed weapons. This makes them a real nuisance until you have the means to apply damage to them, after which they become a minimal threat since they have comparatively low HP. Something that is original about the specters is how they hurt the player. They will cast a spell called Ruin, This spell won't have too much effect the first or second time that it's cast on somebody, but it will kill the character on the third instance. You will notice the progression in the inventory screen as the character sprites get more and more aged, withered, and faded each time the spell Ruin is cast on them, representing their aging, weakening, and succumbing to the effects of the spell, ultimately killing them as their bodies can no longer withstand the aging effects of the Spectre's spell. Next on our list we have Isaiah and the Plague. Isaiah is a map vendor that appears on the first floor of the dungeon at the entrance after the player has encountered Legard one way or the other in the dungeon. Isaiah is a treasure hunter that wears a cloak and a full face mask protecting his face and eyes. Upon speaking with him, he will offer to sell 2 treasure maps to the player, both of them leading to Mahabre. If the player does unearth the treasures in Mahabre, Isaiah will reveal that he was following the player to see if they could find the locations in the treasure maps. Then he will attack the player in order to take the loot. Defeating him here will yield a 3rd map that will lead to the King's Crown needed for Kahara's S ending. In combat, Isaiah will be passive the first turn and drawing his blade on the second. He also has a coin flip attack that will inflict the plague status effect on the player, though it doesn't have any effect. The biggest treasure that the player will get from Isaiah though is looted from his body after defeating the plague treasure hunter in combat, and that's the Iron Mask. The Iron Mask serves as decent head armor, but more importantly, will protect your eyes from the Crow Mauler's flock of crow attacks. Although notably, I should point out, it won't protect your head from the one-hit kill peck attack. Only the Penance Armor helmet will do that. So in conclusion, if you like your eyes, stab the guy sick with the plague. Number 10. The Treacherous Merchant in Fear Hunger 1. This motherfucker right here, I tell you. I found out about his treachery for the first time when I was fighting the traces of Grogoroth and couldn't figure out why I was poisoned until someone in the live stream pointed out very helpfully that I had consumed a poisoned potion without my knowing. Once the player has gone deep enough into the dungeon, the merchant will appear by the entrance of the dungeon. Examining his wares, it will look like he is selling helpful potions to adventurers entering the dungeon, with one that appears to restore mind and one that appears to restore health. But once the player buys anything off of him, he quickly makes an exit and disappears from the dungeon. You'll find out why he does that if you try to use any of his potions. They are all poison. It doesn't matter which one you bought, all the potions will give you the poison status effect when they are used. The different colors of the potions must just be food coloring. And that's why he disappeared. He's getting out with the money before anyone realizes that they've been scammed. Or, well, poisoned, I should say. Just another trick that the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger plays on you. Number 11. The Poisoned Meat Grinder. So this was a fun one that I ran into recording the footage for the Abella lure through. Link for the video, by the way. The Meat Grinder is the best weapon in Fear and Hunger 2 Termina. At least at the time when I'm recording this, since there is talk of a nerf. One reason the Meat Grinder has this status is its high damage output. The other reason is that it inflicts the bleed status effect, which continues to apply damage over time. But you know what would make this already deadly and powerful weapon even better? Poison. Something you can do to get a little more of an edge in tough fights is use Olivia's Poison Tip skill on the Meat Grinder. The Poison Tip skill, like the name implies, coats the weapon in poison, meaning that for a fight, the Meat Grinder becomes the Poisoned Meat Grinder. The Poisoned Meat Grinder will deal out a ton of damage and then inflict both the poison and the bleed status effect, which can devastate most enemies with their combined damage. The Poisoned Meat Grinder is so powerful that it can even one-shot Perkele, the evil spirit asshole, or a word often used when you stub your toe, assuming you speak Finnish, which I don't, by the way. I just learned all this from Wikipedia and the comment section. He won't die with the initial hit, but once the poison and the bleed status effect applies damage, the fight will end in a single turn, making this endgame encounter almost completely trivial. So yes, embrace the Poisoned Meat Grinder. Become the Poisoned Meat Grinder. and overcome all of your enemies in the city of Preheville. Number 12, Tanaka's Sacrifice. So this is one of my common first things to do on a new run in Fear and Hunger 2 that I've gotten quite a few comments about during live streams and videos. And that is to kill Tanaka straight off the bat. But who is Tanaka, the blank soul? Tanaka is introduced as a nervous and stressed out businessman from the fictional nation of Edo. When we meet him, he seems extremely anxious about trying to make a meeting on time. As of yet, we don't see too much of Tanaka during the course of the festival, but we do know that he will eventually learn boxing from Marco, the Preheville pummeler. Killing Tanaka gives you his soul, which then unlocks his skill tree, which is entirely made up of stats upgrades. The first one of them is the one that gives you sweet agility points. Unlocking Tanaka's agility +1 and coupling it with either the Small Things Amulet or Marina's Engrave skill will give you the much desired stat of 16 agility, which grants 2 actions per turn, which can be a game changer. So, if you start with Osa and do the full text adventure, you can start off with the Small Things Amulet. After that, hunt down Tanaka, grab the bone saw from the basement, and then collect a few trophies will let you have 2 actions per turn from the very beginning of the game, making the rest of it that much easier. So yeah, attack the innocent businessman so that your playthrough gets a little bit easier. This is the way of the Sulphur God. Let's hope Tanaka one day becomes a fully playable character so we can learn more about the mysterious man underneath his sweet fedora, and hopefully learn about how powerful he can really become. Number 13, Sir Sergo's Sacrifice. Sir Sergo, I think, is Tanaka's equivalent in the first game. Want to make a Darcy run a little bit easier for yourself? Head straight to Sir Sergo, use the defense stance skill, and get yourself an armor upgrade, and one of the best weapons in the game before you've even really started your descent into the madness of the dungeon. Sir Sergo was dispatched by the Kingdom of Rondon in a desperate attempt to stabilize the deteriorating situation in the dungeon, responding to Captain Rudimer's plea for help and more soldiers to replace the losses they were incurring. In response to Captain Rudimer's plea for help, the kingdom dispatches a few knights under the command of Lord Buckman to help stabilize the situation. That all went to shit real fast, with Sir Seymour having lost his mind, Sir Sergo being separated from everyone and hurt, and Jean captured by a Lord of the Flies, while Buckman is trying to hide from the torturer. If you attack and defeat Sir Sergo, searching his body will yield the chainmail hood, which is a decent piece of armor, and the beloved Claymore. The Claymore can deliver enough damage to one-shot most of the early enemies, and also serves as a way to unlock most of the wooden doors, since the Claymore deals enough damage by itself in one hit to knock most doors down. And also, this way, you get the Claymore without selling any children to Pocket Cat. So, there's that, which is nice. If you are able to get 3 soul stones, you can curse the Claymore, making it deal even more damage. The one downside to the Claymore is that it is a two-handed weapon and not everyone will be able to use it. It also means you cannot equip a shield with it, meaning that you are losing a bit of defense in order to increase your damage output. The Miasma does almost the same amount of damage as the Cursed Claymore and is only one-handed, so you can use a shield with the Miasma. So that might be a preferable loadout sometimes rather than the Cursed Claymore. While betraying an injured and loathsome knight for his equipment is a nasty tactic, you cannot argue with how useful it is to get his equipment early on. Number 14, the death animation in the slums. One of the more unique and unsettling aspects of the first game were the various after-death scenes that would play out if you died to certain enemies, most of which I avoid using to avoid demonetization. In the second game, there aren't quite so many of these after-death scenes, but there are a couple, and one of them is if you die to a pipe villager in the slums. After the player loses consciousness, they'll wake up with their legs cut off, being carried by a villager, and subsequently thrown into a pig pen, with some very hungry little piggies that seem to have a taste for human flesh. I don't think there's too much more I can say about this nasty little sequence, but since this scene lived rent-free in my head for a few days, I thought I'd include it on this list. Number 15, being frustrated to death, the Vile. The pig-masked Vile is one of the tougher enemies the player will encounter early on. Entering the slums, the Vile will be found spraying pesticide on some fish. In combat, he poses a decent challenge but can be a serious threat to players early on. But there is one special way of dealing with this porcine threat, and that's talking him into poisoning himself. If you initiate the talk skill in combat, you will get a chance to say, "What was that?" To which the Vile will try to reply, but you will only hear mumbling through his mask. The player can then repeat the same question again, "What was that?" The Vile will again try to reply, but his words will be muffled by the mask, and you won't be able to make any sense of what the Vile says. If the player asks, "What was that?" a third time, a coin flip will initiate. If you are successful, the Vile will lose his cool trying to reply to you, and you not understanding. So he furiously lifts up his mask so you can understand what he's saying. And in doing so, he exposes himself to the leaking pesticide from the tank that he is carrying and poisons himself to death. He then starts coughing up blood, ending the encounter. So basically, you can piss the Vile off so much that he gets himself killed. A nasty end for a nasty pigman. Number 16. Francois' Warhounds. Once the player has acquired the Tormented, Enlightened, and Endless Soul, they'll be able to fight the Nameless figurine and enter the Golden Temple. In the present, the Golden Temple is darkened, still, quiet, and in obvious ruin. It's been a long time since the Golden Temple was in its prime. Here, you will find the older, defeated, and repentant Francois. The only other thing that stands out are his hounds in cages next to him. It's possible that all the dogs we've seen so far were bred by Francois. If you're going for one of the endings through the gauntlet, you'll have to walk into the throne room of the temple in the present. Making your way down the halls, you'll hear the sounds of the dogs snarling and barking. If you linger, you'll be attacked by no less than 6 of Francois' warhounds. Defeating them doesn't yield any loot or anything like that. But it can be gratifying, since it does mark how much the player and the character have progressed when compared to when you first saw these hounds on the surface. If you return to where you spoke with Francois, you won't find him and you'll see that the hounds are gone. We don't know if they broke out, or was Francois trying to lead you into a trap and then he released them to attack you. But either way, I thought this was a curious encounter and a nasty trap towards the end of the game. Continuing on topic with Francois, for number 17 we have Francois' Eagle, or the Talk Cheese option. When you speak to him as an old defeated shadow of his former glory, you can ask him how to defeat his younger self. He will answer, "I used to be quite the cocky one. Use that to your advantage." This is a hint for a tactic that will make the fight with the younger Francois a lot easier. When you fight him in the throne room in the past, you can use the talk skill on him. If you exploit his ego, tell him that you are closer to a god than he is, and that he is a puppet in the greater scheme of things. Francois will be left stunned and puzzled for a few turns, pondering your words and debating if he is really just a puppet in someone's greater scheme. And the best thing of all is that you can do this ad nauseum. You can repeat it every few turns, and the golden god will be unable to attack you at all. Using this tactic, you can make this boss fight almost trivial, all through exploiting this man's ego and making him think that he's smaller than he thinks he is. Moving on to another one of the new gods, we have Valteo's Quiz Show. Francois' favorite nerd also has a similar exploit that will make his respective encounter easier. Valteo, the nerd, the enlightened one, can be found at the Grand Library. Upon approaching him, he will fling himself into an abyss made out of his books. While Valteo won't do as much raw damage as the fight with the Tormented one, he has the ability to cast Hurting, which can dismember and will also inflict a decent amount of damage. If the fight with Valteo goes on long enough, he will sprout a third eye that can cast the Whispers of Grogoroth spell, which will kill a party member within a few turns, making it a game-ending spell if you are doing a solo run. But, like Francois, there is a unique angle that the player can take to make the fight a bit easier. If you use the talk skill, the enlightened nerd will quiz you on the in-world lore that is found in the books throughout the dungeon. These can be tricky since some of them are asking for very specific years in the history of Fear and Hunger. If you answer correctly, the bookworm will take 400 to 600 points of damage to all of his body parts, dealing upwards of a combined 2000 damage points if you're lucky. This can be done over and over again as long as you get the correct answers, and this will deal a lot of damage to his left brain, right brain, and his third eye. The effect does lessen as he loses more parts of his brain, but it can really help turn the odds in your favor as you face off with Valteo, the Enlightened One. Number 19, the End Guard and Counter Skills in Fear and Hunger 1. For this next one, I wanted to highlight two skills that will be nasty surprises for the denizens of the dungeon that stand in your way. Kahara's End Guard skill and Darcy's Counter skill. Kahara's End Guard skill makes it so that a player enters an offensive posture while moving forward. If you attack an enemy like this, you get an extra first turn that's a sneak attack, granting a free turn before the enemy can act. Now, where it gets really interesting is if you couple this with the White Angel Soul Stone, which will also give you an extra turn. So putting both of these together will give you a full 3 turns before the enemy can even react. I found this to be especially useful for solo runs and dealing with the Moonless Guards in the Gauntlet, since it gives you enough damage output and time to take them down before they can even attack you. Likewise, the counter skill is also a nasty little surprise for your enemies in the dungeon. The counter skill makes it so that the player can retaliate after attacks. This gets particularly useful when fighting the Tormented One and the Gaunt Knight, since they both attack with both arms and each attack will hit multiple times. Since the counter skill retaliates per attack, it means that fighting one of these two, you will be getting 2, 4, or even up to 8 retaliatory attacks per turn. With a little luck, you'll be able to end both fights with these tough enemies in just a couple of turns, and hopefully without too much damage. And to close out our list, at number 20 we have the Condensed Hemlock. So to close out the video, I'd like to talk about this nasty little poison that is definitely overpowered and is the first way I was ever able to beat the Heartless One, and that is using the poison Condensed Hemlock, which is unlocked via the Toxicology skill. Olivia has some of the most powerful skills in the game, specifically the Poison Tip skill and the Toxicology skill. The Toxicology skill grants the knowledge of plant life in Bohemia and how to harvest and prepare plants to extract poison from them. Picking hemlock in the outskirts of the city and the deep forest will grant the ability to craft the condensed hemlock item. Since it requires the hemlock and red herbs, you'll only be able to craft a few of these per run, but that's all you'll need. The condensed hemlock will absolutely trivialize some of the toughest fights in the game. The Kaiser can be easily taken down by using the hemlock on his chest and then just waiting a turn or two. Same thing with the Heartless One. Just use hemlock on her chest and then guard, waiting for the poison to stop the Heartless One's heart. The condensed hemlock is a nasty little poison that will absolutely wreck anyone that it's used on, all through the power of biology and science. Go Olivia. And with that, I'd like to close out my video by saying thank you very much for watching it. I do appreciate all the support I've gotten in the form of views, likes, comments, and shares. Making these videos is a lot of fun for me. So once again, thank you very much. Shout out to all the channel members. I'm flattered by your support. Take care and have a good one.